Hi guys, and welcome to Quiet History Vault. Tonight we slip into a world of soot, damp wool and dim dawn, where the road to work leads not to an office, not to a shop, but to a black mouth in the earth that seems to breathe out cold air of its own. You stand in the grey morning near the pithead boots already wet from last night's rain, and the whole place smells of coal smoke, mud, horse sweat, and weak tea gone lukewarm in tin cups. It is quiet in that strange way. Busy places can be quiet, full of coughs and boot steps and the clink of metal, but no one wasting much energy on cheer. And just to set the mood properly, you probably will not survive this job for very long by modern standards, which is a fairly rude way for history to say good evening. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me your location and local time down in the comments. Now dim the lights. You stand with the others and wait for the day to begin. Though really it has already begun for the women who lit the fire, for the children shaken awake before sunrise, for the men whose shoulders ache before the first load is even lifted. Survival in a mining world does not begin underground. It starts here in the cold open air with timing, with habit, with small acts of preparation so ordinary they hardly look like courage at all. The first thing you notice is the hour. Mining in the 1800s often begins before daylight, because coal and ore do not care much for your comfort, and owners care even less. In many coal districts of Britain, workers gather in darkness, and begin descending at times that would make even a very committed early riser reconsider life choices. It is one of the clearest facts of industrial history that mining days are long, often brutally long, with 10 to 12-hour shifts being common, and sometimes even more. You're not easing into the morning with a gentle stretch and a bit of sunlight through linen curtains. You're hauling your tired body across muddy ground while the world still looks half asleep. Around you the pithead is already alive. A winding engine groans. Chains rattle. A horse snorts steam into the air. Somewhere nearby someone laughs in that dry compact way people do when laughter is less about joy than about proving they're still human. You hear regional accents, scraps of prayer, a muttered complaint about wages, and the sharp voice of an overman keeping things moving. Even before the cage carries anyone down, the mine has its own music. Iron striking iron. Timber knocked into place. Boots grinding grit. A cough that seems to come from deep in the chest and deeper in the ears. You learn quickly that workers survive by respecting routine. A late man may lose pay. A careless man may lose more than pay. So you copy what the experienced miners do. You arrive early enough to gather yourself. You check your lamp if you are lucky enough to have one of your own. You eat something even if appetite is not especially interested. Bread oatcake, a wedge of cheese, maybe a bit of bacon if times are decent. Not a feast exactly. More a peace treaty between your stomach and the day ahead. The clothes are rough and practical. Wool, coarse linen, thick stockings, if you have them boots that have known better years and do not expect better days. Nothing glamorous. The 1800s mine is not a place for elegance, unless one counts the elegant simplicity of wanting all your toes by sunset. Fabrics matter, because damp gets everywhere. Cold settles into knees and wrists. Coal dust creeps into cuffs, collars and eyelids. Some miners tie cloth around the neck or head, not because it looks dashing, but because any barrier between your skin and the mine feels like a tiny personal victory. There is also the matter of knowing your body. That sounds modern, perhaps annoyingly so, but it is true. Miners who last learned to read themselves the way sailors read weather. Is your chest tight this morning? Are your hands steady? Did you sleep enough to trust your footing? Do you have that dull headache that means bad air always hits you harder? Survival is not heroic in a grand-painted sense. It is often just a quiet accounting of weakness before the shift begins, and then there is the family behind every worker standing here. Mining wages support households, but households also support miners in ways no company ledger bothers to note. Somebody patched your shirt. Somebody packed your food. Somebody washed yesterday's grime from clothes that will be filthy again by noon. In social history, this is one of the most important truths. The miner at the pit head is never just one body. He carries a whole domestic network with him, stitched into every sleeve and crust of bread. If he survives the week, it is partly because others have made that survival possible. You may notice boys among the workers too, some far too young by any modern measure. Though to the 1800s, mine, they are simply part of the labour force. Small bodies fit small spaces, and industry has never been shy about turning a child's size into a business advantage. That grim fact sits at the edge of this morning scene not as an exception, but as a routine feature of it. Childhood here is not protected by sentiment. It is clocked in. Still, the pit head is not only hardship, it is community in its stern and sometimes scruffy form. Men share tobacco. Someone passes along news of an injury in another village. Someone else mentions a cousin who found better wages 2 valleys, over which may be true, or maybe one of those hopeful legends workers tell each other to keep despair from getting too comfortable. Quirky stories travel easily in such places. In some mining districts, people once believed certain birds circling above the shaft at dawn could hint at luck. For the day, a little weather lore blended with old superstition and nerves. The mine may be powered by steam and commerce, but the people around it still carry older worlds in their pockets. You stand there and feel the strange divide of the age. This is the century of railways, factories, iron bridges, imperial trade and relentless machinery. Yet the body remains the basic tool. Your back, your lungs, your knees, your caution, your memory. Historians still argue whether the harshest burden on miners came from the physical labour itself, or from the grinding economic pressure that made refusing such work nearly impossible. The debate matters, but at the pit head it all blurs together. Pain and poverty are close companions. Some workers pray before descending. Others joke. A few do both, which feels wise. You hear a man say that if God meant people to live underground, he would have furnished the place with windows. No one answers with theology because the line is good enough on its own. Gentle sarcasm, you discover, is one of the cheaper survival tools available, and unlike boots, it does not wear out quite so fast. As dawn slowly thins the sky, the structures of the mine begin to sharpen. The great wheel, the beam, the timber frames dark with weather, the heap of waste stone, the blackened brick buildings. Everything looks practical, tired and permanent, though in truth mining towns can rise quickly and sink just as quickly when seams fail or owners move on. But for now, this place feels like the centre of your universe, and you are learning the first rule of surviving it. Do not waste strength. Do not waste warmth. Do not waste nerve before you need it. Keep your food simple, your clothing serviceable, your timing exact, and your fear folded neatly where it cannot trip your feet. In a few moments you will step closer to the shaft and the ground under ordinary life will open. But for now, at the edge of the morning survival is still a matter of standing steady among others who know this ritual by heart, breathing smoke and cold and waiting for the cage. You do not get very far in a mine by trusting luck fine tailoring, or the fantasy that the earth will be kind because you ask politely. So before the descent, while the dawn still hangs thin and grey over the pit, you dress for dirt-weight damp and the sort of danger that never bothers to announce itself with ceremony. Clothing in the mining world of the 1800s is not really about appearance. It is about endurance. It is about what can be patched, wrung out, tied tighter, pulled lower and worn again tomorrow, even if today has nearly ruined it. You begin with the shirt rough against the skin, often linen or coarse cotton, if fortune has smiled a little wool, if warmth matters more than comfort. Nothing about it is soft in the modern sense. It scratches, it rubs at the neck, it holds sweat. But it also lasts, which is more important than elegance when your working life is measured in friction. Over that comes a jacket or thick outer layer, though many miners strip down once underground, depending on heat depth and the work itself. A mine can be cold near the surface and stifling farther, in which feels like the place cannot quite decide whether it wants to freeze you or steam you like a dumpling. Your trousers are practical, worn at the knees, shiny with old grime and very likely mended more than once. A torn pair is not thrown out with offended dignity. It is repaired again, then patched so many times it begins to look like a family argument stitched into cloth. In some mining districts, especially among poorer workers, the quality of clothing tells you more about a household strain than any wage slip ever could. A careful patch can be a sign not of neatness, but of necessity done well. Boots matter almost more than anything. Good boots, if you can afford them, are a form of mercy. Thick soles keep some of the cold and wet from clawing upward into your bones. Leather, though precious, can soften in constant damp and split under brutal use. Many miners grease their boots when they can, hoping to hold the water back for another day. It rarely works as well as one would like, but hope in a mining town often comes in small, greasy, stubborn applications. Bad boots mean blisters, and blisters mean altered footing, and altered footing in cramped darkness can lead to injury faster than any grand dramatic cave-in. Socks, if present and intact, are small miracles. If not, strips of cloth may be wrapped around the feet. Hands, too, may be protected in improvised ways, though gloves are not always practical for delicate or forceful tasks. Fingers need grip. Fingers also crack, swell, stiffen, and get bruised. You look at the older workers and notice their hands first. They are maps of labour, thickened at the joints, scarred at the knuckles, blackened at the nail beds, no matter how often washed. There is not much romance in such hands, but there is authority. They know things your softer fingers do not yet know. The cap or hat is simple but useful. It catches sweat off as slight protection from drips and helps keep dust from settling straight into your hair. In some places, miners fasten lamps to caps later in the century, but many still rely on handheld or fixed lamps depending on region, technology and status at work. Open flame lamps remain common for much of the 1800s, especially before safer lamps spread more widely, and that fact alone tells you plenty about how survival often depends on a thread of caution stretched over a pit of risk. One mainstream fact of mining history is that the Davy safety lamp introduced in the early 19th century became an important tool in some coal mines, because its design reduced the chance that the lamp flame would ignite fire damp. Reduced, of course, is not the same as eliminated. The mine enjoys reminding you that progress can be helpful without ever becoming generous. Around your neck or tucked into a pocket may be a cloth. Not elegant, not fresh, but useful for wiping sweat covering the mouth, briefly wrapping a cut or handling hot metal. A simple rag in the 1800s mining world is practically a philosophy. It does 5 jobs badly and therefore becomes indispensable. You learn this quickly. The humble objects matter most: a string, a pin, a bit of twine, a button saved in a tin. Survival often lives in what can be reused. You also notice charms and tokens. Not everyone carries one, but enough do that you stop thinking it is unusual. A coin rubbed smooth, a scrap of ribbon, a tiny Bible verse folded into cloth, a child's button, a polished stone from home. In parts of Europe and Britain, miners sometimes carried small protective tokens or lucky objects blending Christian faith with older folk custom in a way that made perfect emotional sense, even if it made very little scientific sense. One quirky tidbit drifts through these communities now and then: the belief that certain underground knocks or tiny unexplained sounds are warnings from spirits of the mine not merely settling rock. Rationally, you may suspect geology. At dawn, with a shaft waiting for you, your standards for what counts as rational become wonderfully flexible. Dressing is not only about what you wear, It is also how you arrange yourself for effort. You tighten what might snag, you empty what might fall, you tuck away anything breakable or precious, which in many households means almost everything you own is both breakable and precious. You eat before going down because there may be little chance for comfort later. You drink if water is available and clean enough to trust a luxury that is not always guaranteed. You might rub your joints, stretch your back, or simply stand still for a moment and brace your mind. No one calls this wellness. That would sound absurdly polished, but it is body management all the same. There is a social element to dressing too. Workers judge one another quietly, not with cruelty usually, but with practical curiosity. Who is prepared? Who is careless? Who has come with worn-out gear and may struggle? Who looks sick? Who has wrapped a wrist or limps slightly and pretends otherwise? A mine gang survives better when each person can be counted on, so appearance becomes a rough form of information. You're not trying to impress. You're trying to avoid becoming a problem someone else must carry. Above all, the clothes signal class in the plainest possible way. No polished boots, no decorative cuffs, no leisurely layers. Industrial Britain and industrial America create enormous wealth in this century, yet here at the pithead, wealth is mostly something discussed elsewhere by people whose lungs are cleaner. Historians continue to dispute whether miners' clothing should be read chiefly as evidence of poverty or as evidence of a distinct occupational culture shaped by pride, adaptation, and local custom. Both views have merit. A patched sleeve can mean want. It can also mean skill, domestic labour, and a family refusing to let fabric fail before absolutely necessary. You become aware too of smell, wet wool, tallow, oil, leather, cold iron, the stale smoke trapped in cloth from last night's fire. Mining clothes carry home down into the shaft and bring the mine back home again. A wife washing them, a mother mending them, a child hanging them near warmth to dry. Each is drawn into the labour through the garment itself. There is no clean boundary between workplace and household. The dust crosses it daily and without apology, and there is one more quiet rule in the way workers dress. Nothing should surprise your body once you're underground. No loose cuff to catch, no stiff collar to chafe until you lose focus, no new boot that might blister before noon. Familiarity is safety. Even discomfort is preferable if it is known discomfort. You would rather trust the old jacket that pinches than the newer one that shifts oddly when you bend. So you pull everything into place, not elegantly, not heroically, but with the calm economy of people who understand that survival depends on repeated, ordinary acts. You knot the cloth, you tug the boot, you settle the cap, you carry the lamp or prepare to receive it. You become piece by piece fitted to the day's punishment. Then you look toward the shaft again, dressed not to conquer the mine, because no sane worker imagines such a thing, but simply to last inside it a little longer than the danger expects. Then the moment arrives when dressing ends conversation thins out, and everyone turns toward the shaft with that practiced look people wear when they are about to do something unpleasant and entirely normal. You move with the others, boots grinding cinders and damp earth, and the pithead suddenly feels less like a gathering place and more like a border crossing. Above you the morning is still there, pale and chilly and indifferent. Below you is the shift, the dark, the noise, the pressure, the work. The descent itself is short in minutes, sometimes shorter than your thoughts would prefer, but long enough to remind you that survival underground begins with how quickly you learn to notice what the mine is telling you. You step into the cage or into an earlier, rougher arrangement depending on the year and place, and the machinery shudders awake. There is always a brief awkwardness here. Bodies packed close shoulders, brushing nobody, pretending the arrangement is dignified. Metal creaks. Chains tighten. A signal is given. Then the world drops. It is not a smooth theatrical plunge, not some dramatic sweep into perfect blackness like a stage trick. It is shakier than that, louder, more irritatingly real. The cage jerks. Your knees adjust. Air rushes differently around your face. The light above narrows as if someone is closing a lid. Damp cold brushes your cheeks first, and then depending on the shaft, a thicker underground warmth begins to creep in. The smell changes too. At the surface you add smoke, mud, horses, morning air. Here the scents turn mineral wet metallic and stale with coal dust or stone dust hanging beneath everything like a bad memory that never leaves. You hear people breathing more distinctly now. Nobody needs to announce that this part matters. Descent is one of those moments when even habitual workers become a little quieter. The shaft walls slide by in gloom. Water may glimmer on stone. Timbering flashes past. Lamps bob. Somewhere overhead, daylight shrinks to a coin, then to a pin, then to nothing you can trust. You're not simply going down. You're being swallowed in installments. A mainstream historical fact worth holding on to here is that 19th century mines varied widely in engineering and safety, but many shafts were deep, poorly lit and dependent on hoisting systems that were themselves dangerous. Accidents during winding were a known hazard. Cages could jolt, ropes could fail, and signals could be misunderstood. So before you have even touched a tool, the work has already begun, asking whether you are steady on your feet and calm in tight spaces. Very generous of it. Once below, you step out into a world where darkness is not absence but substance. It seems to press in. Lamps carve out little islands of amber light that make the surrounding black look even blacker. The tunnels are not all the same. Some roadways allow a man to stand or almost stand. Others stoop him. Others still demand that he crouch and twist and move with humility no philosopher ever quite described. The floor may be muddy, uneven, slick with seepage or furred with dust. The roof may hover comfortably above your head or hang so low that your neck begins to resent your entire profession within minutes. And this is where the real education starts. Underground workers survive not because the mine is fair, but because they learn to read it like a difficult language. You learn to notice air first. Is it moving? Is it still? Does it feel thin, heavy hot, or strangely flat on the tongue? Experienced miners often speak of bad air not with scientific elegance but with bodily certainty. They know when a tunnel feels wrong. A headache prickles sooner than usual. A lamp burns oddly. Breathing feels laborious for no obvious reason. In some districts, workers relied on tiny clues, the flicker of flame, the behaviour of smoke, the sound of distant ventilation to judge whether a place was fit to enter. Formal ventilation systems existed in many mines, especially later in the century, but they were uneven in quality and often insufficient. Your own senses still mattered terribly. Sound is the next lesson. The underground world has a complicated voice. Water drips with maddening patience. Wheels and carts rumble in the distance. Picks strike coal or rock with different notes depending on what lies before them. Timber creaks. A chain rattles somewhere far off and reaches you softened by stone. Men shout, though never as clearly as they imagine. The mind swallows edges of speech. It changes direction. It turns one gang's labour into another gang's faint haunting. After a while, you stop hearing only noise and begin hearing information. A roof that groans is not the same as a cart that passes. A muffled fall in a neighbouring passage means something. Silence means something too. That is perhaps the most unsettling part. Silence underground can feel almost louder than work. If a place that should carry noise suddenly goes still, workers notice. A stalled current of air and absent clatter, a quiet stretch where a pump or gang should be active, all of it can raise the little hairs on your neck. Historians still argue whether miners of the period relied more on collective custom or on individual instinct when judging underground risk. But standing there with a lamp in your hand, the distinction feels academic. Instinct is often just custom that has sunk into your bones. Touch becomes a guide as well. You run fingers across timber to feel dampness or weakness. You place a palm on rock to sense chill, seepage, roughness, or vibration. You feel the floor underfoot and remember where it dips, where it shifts, where a puddle is deeper than it looks. Your shoulders learn tunnel width. Your knees learn uneven ground. Your lungs learn which corners feel foul. The body becomes a measuring device because instruments where they exist are few, and because survival favours people who do not wait for danger to deliver a formal written notice. It is not all terror, of course, because terror is too expensive to maintain for 10 or 12 hours. Routine takes over. That is one of the strangest mercies in human life. Even underground, the mind begins making patterns. Here is the turn toward the working face. Here is the siding where tubs line up. Here is the patch where water always drips down the back of your collar, as if the earth has developed a personal dislike of you. Familiar misery is easier to manage than unknown misery. You begin to understand why older miners walk with such economical certainty. They have built maps in their heads where the dark itself cannot quite erase them. There are quirky bits of lore attached to this reading of the mine. In some coalfields, workers spoke of certain unexplained knocks in the rock, almost as if the earth were muttering to itself, and a few old hands treated these noises with more respect than they gave some supervisors. One fringe belief held that moles or other burrowing creatures near the surface somehow knew where bad ground lay, which is scientifically shaky at best, and charmingly desperate at worst. Still, in a world where official safety could be thin and danger stubbornly inventive people made meaning from whatever patterns they could gather, you notice too how light works against you. Lamps do not flood the space, they isolate it. A wet wall gleams and vanishes, a face appears and recedes. Dust turns the air into moving grain. Sometimes the darkness seems so complete beyond the flame that it might be solid, something you could lean against if you were foolish enough. The lamp is comfort, but it is also a reminder of everything it cannot show. As you move farther in, heat pockets may surprise you, especially in deeper workings. Mines can be oppressively warm in places, and the air can feel used up, as if several generations have already breathed it before you. Sweat starts beneath your cap and along your back. Yet the damp never quite leaves. That combination heat and wet is its own kind of fatigue. Clothes cling, dust pastes itself to skin, your mouth tastes of metal and grit. Even the simplest motion asks a little extra from you, and so you keep learning. Trust the worker who pauses to listen, respect the man who says a tunnel is wrong, watch the flame, watch the roof, watch your footing. Remember how the air felt in the last turning and compare it to this one. The mine rarely offers certainty, only hints, and the workers who survive longest become experts in hints. By the time you reach the place where the day's labour will truly begin, the descent has already done its work on you. Daylight is gone, surface time feels distant, your senses are narrowed and sharpened all at once. You're inside the breathing darkness now. And if you are to remain whole, you must listen to it more carefully than it ever listens to you. You keep moving inward, and before long the mind stops pretending it is built for full-grown bodies. The passage narrows, the roof lowers, the air grows stiller in odd little pockets. You bend, then stoop, then crouch, and finally understand why the industry has such a practical interest in children. Small hands, small shoulders, small back, small lungs, offered up to large profits. There is no graceful way to say it. In the 1800s, across many mining regions, children work underground because they fit where adults do not, because they can be paid less, and because whole economies learn to treat necessity as if it were natural law. You meet them here not as a sentimental image, but as part of the machinery of the day. A trapper boy sits near a ventilation door in the dark, waiting for the signal to open and close it when carts pass. A hurrier strains forward in a belt and chain, hauling loads through roadways too low to walk upright. A girl does the same in some districts, especially before reforms begin limiting female underground labour in Britain. Their faces are smudged. Their clothes are no finer than anyone else's, only smaller and perhaps more badly worn. Some are drowsy. Some are sharp-eyed in the way children become when childhood has been replaced by schedules and instructions. Some look as if they're trying very hard not to be noticed at all. One central fact from the period is plain enough. The 1842 Mines Act in Britain famously restricted underground work for women and for boys under a certain age following public shock at official reports on mine conditions. But laws and life do not always move at the same speed. Enforcement is uneven, employers are inventive, poverty is stubborn, and child labour remains part of mining culture in different forms and in different places long after reform has announced itself with proper seriousness. The law says one thing, hunger often says another. You watch a young trapper at work and realise how strange the task is. The child sits alone for hours in darkness, broken only by a dim lamp, or sometimes almost no light at all, opening the ventilation door when he hears the approach of tubs, then shutting it again to keep the airflow moving through the mine. It sounds simple from above ground, which is usually a sign that the reality will be miserable. The door is heavy, the waiting is long, the isolation is enormous. The child must listen for distant wheels, voices or coded knocks, then react in time. Miss the moment, and you disrupt the ventilation or the traffic. Do it all day, and you become very familiar with silence. That silence leaves marks. You can feel it even while passing through. A child stationed like that learns to measure time by sounds too faint for most adults to notice. A cough far down the road, a wheel rim scraping stone, the scrape of boots, dripping water. There are reports from mining districts of children becoming anxious in the dark, talking to themselves, singing softly, or inventing private games to keep fear at bay. Some later adults recall this work with numb matter-of-factness. Others remember it with a shiver that survives decades. What exactly long hours of underground solitude did to children's minds remains a matter researchers continue to examine, especially when memoirs, official inquiries, and local oral histories point in slightly different directions. Then there are the hurriers and drawers, children and adolescents moving coal or ore through cramped spaces by brute effort. In British coal mines before reform, some wore belts attached to chains that ran between the legs, crawling on hands and feet while dragging heavy tubs. In a low seam, the body becomes part draft animal, part lever, part endurance experiment. The road is slick, the load resists, the roof catches your back if you rise too high, your palms sting, your knees grind into stone and damp clay. Imagine doing all that before you have finished growing, then imagine adults around you treating it as ordinary because they have no realistic alternative. History can be very calm about things that should make the skin prickle. You notice how survival among child workers depends on imitation. They learn by watching older siblings, parents, cousins, neighbours, how to brace your feet in mud, how to keep the rope from biting too hard at the hip, how to breathe in a cramped place without panicking, how to save a scrap of food for the worst hour of the shift. They also learn how to disappear emotionally when needed. That may be one of the saddest skills in any labouring childhood, the art of shrinking your complaints, because everyone around you is already carrying too many of their own. Yet children are not only passive victims in this world. That truth matters too, even if it sits uncomfortably beside the exploitation. They develop tactics. A trapper may wedge himself a little more comfortably against the wall. A hurrier may alter the angle of the chain to spare one shoulder. Older children exchange warnings about bad-tempered overseers leaking passages or the best time to snatch a bite of food. In some communities they tease one another, trade nicknames, carve marks into wood, and build tiny pockets of fellowship in a system that offers them very little softness. Survival is collective even when the work feels terribly lonely. A curious little detail appears in some accounts from mining families. Children sometimes kept pet mice beetles or even half-tamed birds around pit villages or near work areas above ground. Tiny companions in an environment not famous for tenderness. Whether every tale is reliable is another matter, but the image persists because it feels emotionally true. In a harsh industrial landscape, people often make room for very small attachments. Another odd thread of folklore suggests that some children were warned never to whistle in certain passages because it might cause trouble, whether in the form of rueful spirits or an irritated overman who preferred less music in the ventilation system. Superstition, discipline, and boredom blend together quite easily down here. You can see too how families rationalise it. They do not always speak in the language reformers later prefer. They speak in the language of rent-bred coal for the fire boots for winter. A child's earnings might be small, but small is not the same as unimportant when a household budget is balanced on a knife edge. In many mining districts, family survival depends on pooling income from every available member. To remove a child from labour without replacing the wages can mean real hardship. This does not make the system kind. It makes it tragically effective. Observers in the 19th century disagree over just how representative the worst child labour cases are. Some official investigations record shocking scenes of exhaustion near naked labour in heat and severe physical strain. Other testimony, often from owners or local defenders, insists conditions vary, that some children are well treated, that the reports are exaggerated by moral campaigners with an appetite for outrage. The truth, as so often likely, lies in grim variation. Some pits are worse than others. Some gangs are more protective. Some children are physically stronger. Some are simply less lucky. Researchers remain divided over how far sensational parliamentary testimony captured the average experience versus the most appalling examples. But average misery is still misery, and even the milder descriptions do not exactly sound like a childhood anyone would volunteer for. When you pass these young workers, what strikes you most is not drama but normalization. No one stops the shift to marvel at the injustice. The carts still move, doors still open and shut, instructions are still barked, children still strain, wait, listen, crawl, drag, and learn. That is how exploitative systems protect themselves. They become ordinary enough to vanish into routine, and still human personality survives. One child pulls a face behind an older worker's back, another hums under the breath. A trapper startles at a rat and then tries to look dignified about it, which is difficult when you're 9, and the rat seems to have more confidence than you do. A sister scolds a brother for wasting a crust of bread. Someone laughs in a burst so sudden it sounds almost rebellious. Little sparks in all this dark. You continue forward, carrying the knowledge with you. The mine is not only supported by timbers, rails, doors, ropes, and beasts. It is propped up by childhood spent early, by families making impossible calculations, by children who learn grown-up endurance before they have even lost the softness of their voices. And in these narrow seams, where the earth squeezes every movement smaller, you begin to understand that surviving a mining life is never just about one worker alone. It is also about the young already labouring in the dark, keeping the whole black machine in motion. You move on from the narrow seams and the children who keep them working, and the mine opens just enough to let adult labour show its full weight. This is where the day becomes brutally physical in the most obvious sense. Here the work is not waiting by a door or dragging a tub through a crawl space, but striking, levering, lifting, shoveling, bracing, hauling and repeating, until repetition itself feels like a force of nature. If you want to survive a mining job in the 1800s, you do not simply need strength. You need to know how not to spend it all at once. At first glance, the tools seem almost insultingly simple. Pick, shovel, hammer, wedge, crowbar, drill. Nothing elegant, nothing comforting, and certainly nothing ergonomic in the modern sense, where someone in an office might once have adjusted the grip angle and written a report about hand fatigue. Down here, the report's your shoulder, and it files its complaints in real time. Iron bites coal or rock, steel rings against stone, wood handles grow slick with sweat and grime. Every tool feels heavier by afternoon than it did at dawn, which is a small but very rude mystery of manual labour. You watch experienced workers and realise they do not waste movement. A novice hacks wildly, trying to overpower the seam by enthusiasm. That approach lasts perhaps 20 minutes, then the arms begin to burn, the back tightens, and the breath goes ragged. The old hands do it differently. They find a rhythm. They place the feet carefully, they angle the strike. They let the body's weight travel into the blow instead of trying to muscle every hit from the shoulders alone. It is not graceful exactly, but it has the stern efficiency of something learned through pain. Endurance in the mine is a craft, not just a trait. One well-established fact about 19th century mining is that much of the extraction remains intensely manual, despite the era's broader industrial transformation. Steam power changes transport, drainage and hoisting in many places, but at the working face, countless miners still rely on their own bodies and basic hand tools to cut coal or ore. The Industrial Revolution, for all its triumphal noise, still leans heavily on men crouched in bad air, swinging iron at stone. That contrast sits at the heart of the century, vast progress at the top, human exhaustion underneath holding it up. The seam itself determines how you work. In a higher face you may stand or half-stand, though comfortably would be a reckless choice of word. In a thin seam you kneel, crouch, or lie at angles that make the joints invent new grievances. Your neck learns humility. Your knees stop expecting kindness. Your lower back becomes an unwilling theologian deeply engaged with the problem of suffering. Coal has to be undercut, loosened, broken free. Ore has to be chipped and sorted. Rock must sometimes be cleared away. Timbering must be set or adjusted. Tubs must be filled. Nothing happens quickly, yet everything is expected quickly, and that brings you to pacing the true secret. Workers survive by dividing the shift mentally. Not all at once. Never all at once. You give what the first hour requires and save something for the third, the sixth, the ninth. You learn that a burst of energy can be a kind of foolishness. Better to move steadily than brilliantly. Better to preserve the hands than prove a point. Better to lift in a way that hurts less tomorrow, because tomorrow is absolutely coming whether you invite it or not. Breathing becomes part of technique too. You do not merely inhale and exhale. You coordinate breath with effort. Strike, breathe. Lift, breathe. Brace, breathe. In hot or dusty workings, that rhythm keeps panic and fatigue from spiralling together. The dust dries your throat. The air tastes blunt and gritty. Sweat slips down the spine and pools at the waist. Your shirt sticks. Your palms sting. Muscles begin to tremble in small private ways. Yet the body, annoyingly adaptable, keeps finding another level of function so long as you do not abuse it too recklessly. Workers also survive by sharing labour intelligently, though this depends very much on gang region and management. A trusted pair can move more safely than two strangers trying to prove themselves. One prees while the other steadies. One fills while the other shifts the tub. One listens for the roof while the other finishes the cut. In a decent crew, warnings are brief but meaningful. Watch that stone. Mind your foot. Leave that bit. Enough. Such tiny exchanges can save fingers, backs, or lives. In a bad crew, pride and haste create misery fast. Then there is the timbering, one of those jobs that sounds secondary until the roof reminds everyone who is actually in charge. Props and supports are set to hold loose ground, and the quality of that work can decide whether a place remains merely unpleasant or becomes catastrophic. Handling timber underground means weight, awkward angles, splinters, bruised knuckles, and constant judgment. Is this roof trustworthy for another hour? Is that prop seated properly? Does the rock sound hollow? The mine is full of questions nobody wants answered the hard way. A rather strange little detail from some mining communities is that workers sometimes gave nicknames to favourite tools, especially a pick that felt well balanced or unusually reliable. This is either charmingly human or a sign that the mine had reduced one's social circle to iron objects, perhaps both at once. In oral recollections, a man might praise a hammer as if it had character, curse a worn shovel as if it had malice, or speak of a certain wedge with more warmth than he ever uses for management. When the tool is in your hand for most of your waking life, perhaps affection is inevitable. Arguments continue among labour historians over whether brute strength or technical skill mattered more in day-to-day mining survival. The sensible answer is probably both, but the question persists because mining sits awkwardly between craft and punishment. Outsiders often imagine it as pure force. Insiders know that force without judgment is a quick route to injury. Choosing where to cut, how to stand, when to stop, how much to load, when to trust a partner, when to distrust the seam, all of that belongs to skill. Yet skill without physical stamina does not get much done either. The mine being tiresomely demanding asks for everything. You notice older workers especially. Some are not old in years, merely old in mining years, which is something harsher. Their bodies carry shortening and thickening and stiffness. A shoulder hangs oddly. A knee refuses full obedience. A wrist has learned to ache before rain. Yet these men often outlast stronger, younger ones because they understand economy. They know when a blow is wasted. They know when a cart is overloaded. They know the exact point at which effort turns from productive to dangerous. This knowledge is not written in manuals. It is written in bodies that have paid tuition. There is also the emotional discipline of the work. Monotony can be dangerous because it encourages haste. Frustration can be dangerous because it encourages violence against the seam that tools the body. Workers survive partly by staying dull in the correct way, alert but not agitated, focused but not feverish. It is a peculiar mental state halfway between concentration and surrender. You accept that the work is relentless, and then shape yourself to its rhythm. Resentment may still hum quietly in the background, but it cannot be allowed to grab the handle. As the hours lengthen, the sounds around you blend into a rough music. Picks ringing, shovels scraping, coal knocking into the tub, timber thudding into place, breath through the nose, boots shifting on grit, far away a wheel. Nearer a muttered joke about how the owner should come down and do one useful thing before dying rich. That kind of comment does not improve the air, but it does improve morale slightly. By now you understand something vital. Surviving this labour is not about conquering the mine through heroics. Heroics are expensive and rarely rewarded. It is about rhythm restraint and the patient management of your own strength. Keep the motions true, keep the breath even, keep the load sensible, keep enough left in the arms for the next hour and the hour after that. The mind can always ask more. The trick is not giving it all at once, and so you go on striking, levering, hauling, learning the pace by feel. The work keeps pressing against the limits of muscle and nerve, but you're beginning to see how miners endure it. Not because they are superhuman, because they become careful custodians of the little energy they have, spending it like poor households spend money one necessary piece at a time. After hours of striking, hauling, bracing and crouching, your body begins to narrow its ambitions. It no longer dreams of comfort, justice, or a meaningful work-life balance. It would settle very happily for a swallow of water, a less hostile patch of stone to sit on, and a bit of bread that has not absorbed half the mine on the way from your pocket to your mouth. Hunger underground is not dramatic in the storybook sense. It is steady, practical, and oddly impolite. It turns up on time, asks for attention, and stays with you whether the shift is going well or badly. The pause for food, when it comes, is rarely luxurious. You do not unfold a charming napkin and gaze thoughtfully at the earth's interior. You crouch where you can, or sit on timber rock, or the edge of a tub, and you eat in the company of damp air coal dust, and the sort of exhaustion that makes even stale bread seem almost profound. This is one of the quieter parts of surviving a mining life. People talk about explosions, Kevin's bad air, broken bones. But getting enough food, enough drink, and enough energy into the body day after day is its own battle, and often one fought with less attention than it deserves. The meal itself is usually simple. Bread is common. Cheese, onions, oatcake, cold potatoes, bacon, fat. If the household can spare it, perhaps a bit of meat, for the fortunate or the festive, though the word festive is doing heroic work there. In some mining communities, workers bring pasties, pies, or heavy portable foods designed less for pleasure than for endurance. Food needs to survive being carried squashed and dusted and then eaten without ceremony, in a place where your hands are not exactly clean enough for a dinner invitation. The idea of a fresh salad would seem almost comic. Lettuce does not hold up particularly well while hauled through a pit. One very clear historical reality is that miners require huge amounts of energy for the labour they perform, yet many working-class diets in the 19th century remain limited, repetitive, and vulnerable to price changes. Bread, potatoes, porridge, tea cheese, and bits of salted meat carry enormous weight in these communities. Nutrition as a modern science is still developing, but workers understand perfectly well in practical terms that a poor meal makes a poor shift. They may not speak of calories or protein ratios. They know when a body has been fed and when it has merely been delayed. You feel that truth in yourself now. The first bite does not so much satisfy as steady. Your stomach annoyed by the hour, and the labour accepts the offering and agrees to continue negotiations. Dust grits between your teeth. Your throat may be dry enough that swallowing takes effort. If you have tea in a bottle or tin, it may be lukewarm or cold by now, but even that tastes like civilization. In many mining households, tea becomes less a luxury than a practical stimulant and comfort. Part warmth, part habit, part chemistry, keeping the day moving. Water is vital too, of course, though safe drinking water is not always as available or as clean as any sane person would like. Some workers prefer tea partly because boiled water feels less risky than the alternative, and underground thirst is a sly enemy. You sweat in heat, strain in bad air, breathe dust, and often do not quite notice how much fluid the body's losing, until fatigue turns heavy and clumsy. Lips crack, the mouth goes sticky, the head begins to ache in a broad, stupid way. Hands feel weak around the tool handle. A miner who pushes through that without recognizing it may start making small errors, and small errors in a mine have a bad habit of becoming memorable. So drinking like pacing is part of skill, not too little, not too late. If there is water worth trusting, you make use of it. There is a domestic tenderness hidden inside this meal, even down here. Someone packed it. Someone chose which crust to send, which scrap of cheese, which onion, which flask. In many mining households, women's labour shapes men's survival with exhausting consistency. Food is purchased carefully, stretched, carefully cooked, carefully packed, carefully. A bad wage, a late wage, or a company store debt can shrink a miner's dinner before he has even picked up a tool. So when you unwrap that bread or break off that oatcake, you are not merely eating. You are consuming a household strategy. Miners also become connoisseurs of what the body can handle underground. Some foods sit too heavily, some sour quickly, some are too precious to waste on a shift. Others are ideal precisely because they ask nothing fancy of time or appetite. A wedge of cold pudding, a thick slab of bread, and dripping a potato eaten with blackened fingers. These are practical answers to an impractical life. One old recollection from mining districts mentions workers warming pasties or food near a lamp or a warm stone where conditions allowed not enough to make it fine dining, but enough to turn cold grease into something slightly less tragic. Whether every such tale is common practice is another matter, but it captures the eternal working person's dream of an edible lunch. The social atmosphere of eating matters too. Some workers talk more when the tools stop. Others go almost silent, saving effort even in speech. Jokes drift around, often dry and brief. Someone complains that the bread is so hard it may qualify as roofing material. Someone else says that if management ever fed the men properly, productivity might improve, then pauses as if surprised by this revolutionary economic breakthrough. A laugh moves through the group, tired but real. Humour does not fill the stomach sadly, though it does seem to take the edge off indignity. Disagreements remain among historians about how far diet directly shaped accident rates and long-term health in mining communities compared with other factors like ventilation infection, overwork and housing. The evidence suggests all these things intertwine, which is perhaps less satisfying than a single clean answer, but much truer to life. Poor diet weakens resilience. Hard labour increases nutritional need. Low wages limit food quality. Illness then makes work harder. Work then deepens exhaustion. The cycle feeds itself with terrible efficiency. You also notice that not everyone eats the same amount or with the same peace of mind. Boys may wolf down food quickly, then still look hungry. Older men sometimes eat slowly, preserving the moment as much as the calories. A man worried about debt may have less appetite than usual. Another may save half for later, an act of discipline or necessity depending on the day. Food can be exchanged too. A bite traded for tobacco. A crust handed to someone who came with almost nothing. These gestures matter. In a place where money is scarce and labour relentless, a shared meal, however plain, becomes a quiet form of loyalty. There are stranger little customs as well. In a few mining communities, certain foods gather reputations for luck or misfortune. One worker might mutter that beginning a shift with a particular item is a bad sign, while another swears by it because his father did. You can dismiss that as nonsense, and perhaps it is, but people who live close to danger often give small rituals more weight than outsiders expect. It is not really about food. It is about coaxing order from uncertainty with whatever materials happen to be available, including onions, crusts, and superstition. The bodily sensations of the meal are almost more important than the meal itself. The jaw working, the shoulders easing for a minute, the hand resting open instead of gripping iron, the spine uncoiling as much as the roof allows, the breath slowing, the lamp trembling gently in its own little pool of light. For a few minutes the mine recedes, not because it is less dangerous, but because your attention turns inward. You become aware of your own tiredness in a fuller way. The ache in the knees, the soreness in the wrists, the dust in the throat, the wet sock beginning to rub, the heat under the cap, the hunger not entirely solved, only quieted. Then comes the worst little truth of all: the break ends. Hunger may soften, but the shift does not. You fold the cloth or tuck away the remaining crust, wipe a hand against your trousers and return to the tools. Still, that pause has done more than fill the stomach. It has reminded the body that it is still being maintained, still being kept in motion by small acts of care. In a 19th century, mine food is not merely fuel. It is proof that someone is still trying to keep you alive, including yourself. And with that in the stale air and the wavering light, you rise again and go back to work, carrying bread, tea, and the last stubborn warmth of the meal into the next stretch of darkness. When you finally surface again in your thoughts, even if your body remains underground for now, you begin to understand that survival in a mining world is never confined to the tunnels themselves. It stretches outward into homes, kitchens, washhouses, narrow streets, and long evenings, where exhaustion sits at the table like an extra guest who never leaves. And at the centre of that wider world, often overlooked in the noise of picks and carts, are the women whose labour quietly holds the entire system together. You step back above ground for a moment in your mind and see the rhythm of a mining settlement. Rows of cottages, some sturdy, many not. Smoke rising from chimneys, children moving between doorways, Water carried laundry, scrubbed meals, prepared boots, dried, wounds tended. None of this appears in production tallies, yet without it the mine would stall within days. A miner who is not fed, not clothed, not patched up, does not last long enough to be useful to anyone, least of all himself. It is a well-documented truth that women in mining communities contributed significantly to household economies, even when they were barred from underground work in certain regions, after reforms like the 1842 Mines Act in Britain. Their labour did not vanish, it shifted. They took in washing, worked in fields, managed small gardens, kept animals where possible, sold goods, mended endlessly, and stretched every coin until it nearly snapped. In some places, especially earlier in the century or outside Britain, women still worked above ground sorting coal or carrying loads their bodies marked by labour, just as surely as those of the men below. You imagine a miner returning home after a shift. He's coated in dust, stiff with effort, hungry again, despite having eaten and carrying the mine back with him in smell and silence. Before he ever reaches the table, someone has already been working for hours to make that return possible. Water has been heated, or at least fetched. Clothes have been shaken out, patched, prepared. Food has been cooked with whatever ingredients the household could afford that week. Children have been managed, soothed, or set to their own small tasks. The home is not a refuge from labour, it is another site of it. There is something almost invisible about this kind of endurance. It does not echo through tunnels, it does not strike sparks from stone, yet it is constant. In many mining families, women develop extraordinary skill in managing scarcity. A joint of meat becomes several meals. Bread is stretched, leftovers are reinvented. Waste is nearly eliminated because waste is unaffordable. A tear in a shirt becomes a patch, then another patch, then a careful reworking of the fabric into something else entirely. You could say that miners learn to conserve energy underground while their households learn to conserve everything else above it. You also begin to notice the emotional labour, though no one in the 19th century calls it that. A miner lives with risk as a daily companion. Every shift carries the possibility of injury or worse. Families know this. Wives, mothers, sisters, daughters. All live with the quiet calculation that a man leaving in the morning may not return in the evening. And yet life must proceed. Meals must be cooked. Children must be raised. Small comforts must be created in a world that does not provide many. It takes a particular kind of resilience to build normality on top of uncertainty. There are moments of humour too often sharper and more grounded than anything underground. In some communities, women joke about the endless battle with coal dust, remarking that it finds its way into places no respectable dust should ever reach. There are stories of washing lines that never quite produce clean clothes, only cleaner ones, as if the entire landscape is made a pact with soot. It is a strange domestic comedy, half frustration, half acceptance, entirely real. At the same time, tensions exist. Mining wages can be unpredictable. Company stores, debt, and irregular pay create strain. A household budget can feel like a puzzle designed by someone who enjoys watching others struggle. Disagreements over spending, over saving, over the use of limited resources are inevitable. Some accounts from the period hint at arguments that flare quickly and fade just as quickly because there is no energy left to sustain them. Others suggest deeper conflicts, especially where alcohol injury or prolonged hardship take their toll. Writers and researchers who study these communities often discuss whether the domestic sphere offered genuine refuge from industrial life, or whether it simply mirrored its pressures in a different form. The answer is rarely simple. For some, home provides warmth, companionship, and a sense of belonging that makes the mine bearable. For others, it is another place where scarcity and fatigue press in from all sides. What seems clear is that the boundary between work and home is thin, almost porous. Coal dust crosses it daily. So do worry and exhaustion. There are also traditions and beliefs that grow up around this shared life. Some households maintain small rituals for protection, a prayer said at the door, a gesture repeated before a shift, a quiet acknowledgement of risk that feels both practical and symbolic. In certain regions, it was thought unlucky to sweep the floor immediately after a miner left for work, as if tidying too soon might disturb the fragile balance keeping him safe. Whether anyone truly believed this in a strict sense is difficult to say, but the persistence of such customs suggests a deep need to feel some influence over events that are largely beyond control. You notice how children fit into this above-ground world as well. They're not only workers in the mine, they're helpers at home, fetching water, minding younger siblings, running errands, assisting with small domestic tasks. Their lives are shaped by labour in multiple directions. Yet there are still glimpses of play of laughter, of small rebellions against responsibility, a game in the street, a shouted joke, a moment of rest that feels like a stolen luxury. And then there is the question of identity. Mining communities often develop strong local cultures, shared accents, shared customs, shared ways of speaking about work and hardship. Women are central to this. They pass on stories, songs, habits, and expectations. They shape how children understand the mine long before those children ever see it. In that sense, survival is not only physical, it is cultural. It is taught, repeated, reinforced across generations. You begin to understand that the phrase mining job is almost misleading. It suggests a single activity, a man with a tool underground. In reality, it is a web of labour that stretches across an entire community. The man at the coalface depends on the child at the door, the partner at home, the neighbour next door, the informal networks of help and exchange that make daily life possible. Remove any part of that web and the system strains. There is a quiet dignity in this, though. It would be wrong to romanticize it too much. People are not enduring because hardship is noble. They're enduring because they must. Still within that necessity there is care, ingenuity, humour, and a kind of stubborn continuity. Meals appear, clothes are mended, children grow, stories are told. Even in a place shaped by extraction and profit, human life insists on its own patterns, and as you prepare to return your focus fully underground, you carry this awareness with you. The strength you spend with a pick and shovel is only one part of the story. Above you, unseen in the dark, a whole network of effort is quietly making sure you can come back tomorrow and do it again. You do not always get a warning when the mind decides to remind you who is in charge. Sometimes there is a hint, a faint creak, a shifting of dust, a subtle change in how the roof feels above you. And sometimes there is nothing at all, just a sudden crack that splits the air like a snapped bone, followed by a rush of sound and motion that leaves no time for reflection. Cave-ins are among the most feared dangers in 19th century mining, not because they are rare, but because they are unpredictable in a way that makes preparation feel both essential and insufficient. You're working focused on the rhythm you have learned to trust when you feel it first. Not even a sound, more a sensation, a slight tremor through the ground, a suggestion that something above is reconsidering its position in the world. Your hands pause, your breath shortens. Somewhere nearby, another worker goes still in the same instant, as if a shared instinct has passed silently between you. This is how survival often begins underground. Not with alarms or instructions, but with a collective hesitation, a moment where bodies recognize danger before words can form it. Then comes the noise. Timber groans, a long drawn-out complaint that seems to come from the very spine of the earth. Small fragments fall first, dust and grit pattering down, like a warning that may or may not be taken seriously enough. A stone drops somewhere behind you. Someone mutters something sharp, not quite a shout, not quite a prayer. And then if the roof gives way, it does so with a violence that feels almost personal, as if the mine has chosen this moment to express its displeasure. Roof falls were a constant hazard in many 19th century mines, particularly in coal workings, where the removal of material left voids that had to be supported by timbering. Even with supports in place, the ground could shift unexpectedly. Records from the period show that collapses accounted for a significant number of injuries and deaths, often trapping workers beneath rock and debris or cutting off escape routes. It is one of those grim statistical realities that sits quietly in the background until you hear that first crack and realise you're standing inside the numbers. If the fall is small, you react quickly. You step back or sideways or flatten yourself against a safer wall if such a thing exists. Your mind moves faster than your thoughts, choosing from patterns you have absorbed without quite noticing. Avoid the centre. Watch the edges. Do not run blindly. Running in a low tunnel can be as dangerous as standing still. Your body feels clumsy and sharp at the same time, every movement exaggerated by the knowledge that a mistake now could be final in a very literal sense. If the fall is larger, there is chaos. Dust fills the air thick and choking, turning every breath into effort. Light dims as particles swallow the glow of lamps. You hear shouts, but they come muffled, distorted, as if the mine itself is reluctant to let sound travel freely. Someone calls a name, someone else answers, or does not. That uncertainty hangs heavier than the dust. You crouch, covering your mouth with the cloth you carry, feeling grit settle against your teeth and tongue. The instinct to breathe deeply clashes with the reality that deep breaths bring more dust into your lungs. So you take shallow pulls of air steady, if you can manage it, trying not to panic. Panic is another kind of collapse, internal rather than external, and just as dangerous. There are decisions to make quickly. Can you move forward? Is the passage behind you clear? Are others trapped? Do you stay and help, or do you go for assistance? These are not moral questions in the abstract. They are immediate practical choices made under pressure, often guided by training experience and the unwritten rules of the crew. In some cases, a man who rushes in to help may become trapped himself. In others, hesitation costs someone precious minutes. There is no perfect answer, only the least bad one available at the time. Miners learn to read the aftermath as carefully as they read the warning signs. The angle of fallen rock, the stability of remaining supports, the sound of shifting debris. A secondary collapse is always a possibility, which adds another layer of tension to any rescue effort. You watch experienced workers test the ground with cautious movements, listening for telltale creaks, feeling for vibration through their boots. It is a slow, deliberate process, even when urgency presses hard. There are stories passed along in mining communities of workers who developed an almost uncanny sense for unstable ground. One tale speaks of a man who refused to enter a particular section on a certain day, claiming the rock felt wrong beneath his feet only for a collapse to occur hours later. Whether such accounts are entirely accurate or shaped by hindsight is difficult to determine, but they persist because they speak to a truth everyone underground understands. Survival often depends on instincts that are hard to explain and impossible to ignore. At the same time, not every warning is clear and not every collapse can be predicted. Researchers still examine the balance between geological conditions, mining methods, and human judgment in these incidents, trying to understand how much control workers truly had over their environment. The conclusion, unsatisfying as it may be, is that control was limited. Knowledge improved safety, but it did not eliminate risk. The mine remained an unpredictable partner in every shift. You also notice how quickly the group dynamic shifts in these moments. The quiet rhythm of individual labour gives way to collective focus. Voices become sharper, more direct. Instructions are given and followed without the usual grumbling. There is no space for ego here. Everyone depends on everyone else in a very immediate way. Even the smallest task, moving a stone, holding a beam, passing a tool, becomes part of a larger effort to restore order or extract someone from danger. And when the immediate crisis passes, if it passes, there is a strange lull. Dust settles slowly. Breathing steadies, though it may remain uneven for some time. People take stock. who is present, who is injured, who needs help. The mine, having made its point, returns to its usual oppressive quiet as if nothing has happened. That is perhaps the most unsettling part. The earth does not acknowledge what it has done. It simply continues. You stand there, heart still working harder than usual, hands slightly unsteady, and realise how thin the line is between routine and disaster. A few inches of rock, a single weakened support, a moment's misjudgment, and everything changes. Yet tomorrow and the day after the work will continue. The same tunnels will be entered. The same risks will be taken. Not because anyone has forgotten, but because there is no real alternative. So you brush the dust from your clothes as best you can, adjust your grip on the tool and return to the task. Not because it feels safe, but because survival in this world often means continuing in spite of knowing exactly how unsafe it can be. After the dust settles and the tools begin moving again, you learn to fear something you cannot always see at all. Falling rock is terrible because it announces itself with noise and force. Bad air is worse in a quieter way. It creeps, it waits, it changes the mood of a tunnel before it changes anything else. The flame on a lamp shivers oddly. Your head feels thick. Breathing seems just a little harder than it should be. A man pauses and says nothing, but he does not like the place. Another worker glances at the roof, then the lamp, then the narrow darkness ahead. Underground air itself can become the enemy, and the most dangerous thing in the passage may be the part you have been trusting every second without a thought. You move deeper and become aware that every mine has its own atmosphere in more ways than one. There is temperature, smell, dampness, dust, but also the invisible chemistry of gases, ventilation, and stale oxygen that decides whether a shift is merely miserable or suddenly catastrophic. Coal mines in particular carry the menace of fire damp, mostly methane, which can ignite if it meets an open flame in the wrong concentration. Then there is choke damp, black damp, and other foul mixtures that leave lamps dim and lungs desperate. Workers may not always use the modern labels precisely, yet they know perfectly well when air has gone bad. The body tells them, and often the lamp does too. One established reality of 19th century mining is that gas explosions and suffocation are among the most dreaded hazards in coal districts, especially where ventilation is poor or workings are extensive. Ventilation systems do improve over time with furnaces, shafts, doors, and other methods designed to force air through the mine, but the results are uneven. A system may function well one week and poorly the next. A door left open too long can disrupt airflow. A new working can alter the movement of gas. Owners may spend money on improvements or decide with the usual generosity of profit-minded men that existing arrangements are probably good enough until they very much are not, so you learn to watch the flame. A lamp is not merely light, it is a kind of conversation with the air. Does it burn low? Does it stretch upward strangely? Does it flicker where it should be steadier? Men underground become intimate with these tiny changes. A lamp dimming in a low oxygen space or behaving oddly in the presence of gas can give warning where nothing else will. The introduction of safety lamps in parts of the 19th century gives workers and engineers a better tool than a naked flame in many circumstances, but no lamp makes a mine harmless. A safety lamp can help detect danger. It can also tempt management into believing a risky place has become acceptable simply because the technology looks respectable. Human beings are remarkably gifted at misreading partial solutions as full ones. The tunnel you're in now feels different. The air is still too still and warm in a used, breathless way. You draw in a breath and it seems to stop halfway at the chest. Not fully, just enough to make you aware of the act. That sensation matters. Old hands notice it at once. They pause. They lift the lamp. They look at one another without saying much. Survival here depends on respecting the unease before it becomes obvious panic. Many younger workers make the mistake of assuming that if a place does not smell strange, it must be safe. The mine is under no obligation to provide a warning with a memorable scent. Then there are the canaries, the creatures that have become so closely tied to mining memory that they almost seem like symbols dreamt up by later storytellers. Yet birds really were used in some mines as living warning systems, because they are more sensitive than humans to certain toxic gases. A canary in a small cage carried into the workings might weaken or show distress before the men themselves felt the full effects. It is a plain and rather heartbreaking arrangement. The tiny bright creature full of song above ground becomes a detector underground, a delicate alarm in feathers. In later years, some cages were even designed to allow for rapid oxygen revival for the bird, which is touching in theory, and still a fairly strange career path for a canary. You see one here in the imagination of the era, its yellow body almost absurd in all this blackness. It chirps perhaps, or perhaps it sits quietly fluffed against the damp chill of the journey. The men do not sentimentalize it much in the moment because sentiment is hard to maintain while hauling coal in bad air. Still, the bird matters. Its condition can mean the difference between retreat and disaster. There is a peculiar tenderness in that dependence the lives of hardened workers tied partly to the nerves and lungs of a fragile animal. Not everyone trusted canaries equally, and not every mine used them in the same way or at the same period. Some relied more heavily on lamps on inspection, or on the instincts of seasoned men. Others combined methods. Researchers still wrestle with how widespread certain gas detection practices truly were in everyday 19th century work, versus how often later memory compresses several generations of mining into one familiar image. Yet the deeper truth remains. Workers needed warnings, and they used whatever warnings they could get. Gas itself has a strange psychological effect. A collapse is immediate, visible and loud. Gas makes a man suspicious of emptiness. It turns stillness into a threat. It makes an ordinary stretch of tunnel feel subtly false, as if the world has been rearranged by something you cannot argue with. You may feel light-headed. Another man complains of a headache. A third says the place is dead, and everyone understands what he means, even if no one could define it neatly for a chemist. Language underground is often bodily before it is scientific. In these moments, the crew becomes extremely attentive to procedure. Doors are checked. Airways are considered. A deputy or overman may inspect the passage if the system of the mine provides such oversight. Men may withdraw from a heading until the air is judged safer, or they may be told to continue in conditions they privately dislike very much because production has a nasty way of outranking caution when the books are being balanced elsewhere. Some of the bitterest resentment in mining communities grows from exactly this pressure, the feeling that men are expected to gamble with their lungs because someone above ground would prefer not to slow the output. There are little signs besides the lamp and the bird. A candle may burn with a blue cap in certain gases which some experienced workers learn to interpret. A feeling of heaviness in the legs, sudden sleepiness, a sound in your own ears that is not really a sound at all, more a woolly confusion settling into the mind. Such symptoms can be deceptive because exhaustion already lives in the body. Is this ordinary fatigue or something worse? Is that headache from the labour, the dust, the poor sleep, or the air itself? The uncertainty is part of the danger. An odd piece of pit law in some regions held that certain underground spaces were hungry, as if they swallowed flame and breath out of malice. It is not scientific language, no, but it captures the sensation better than one might expect. A tunnel with bad air does feel hungry. It eats light. It drains clarity. It asks the lungs to work harder and offers less in return. Sometimes old expressions survive because they describe experience more faithfully than formal terms do. Writers and specialists who study mining have long disagreed over how much control workers themselves could exert over air safety, compared with engineers, owners, and official inspectors. Men underground certainly possessed local knowledge and practical skill. They recognized danger signs, adjusted doors, respected warnings, and sometimes refused suspect areas. Yet the larger ventilation design of a mine, the investment in safe systems, the enforcement of standards, all of that often lay outside their control. Once again, the working body carried the consequences of decisions made elsewhere, and so you keep moving with a new level of alertness. You check the flame, you notice the bird, you trust the old hand who says no, not there, not yet. You pay attention to your own breathing in a way surface life rarely demands. Every inhale becomes a question briefly answered. Every exhale is relief, though not enough to relax fully. The mine has taught you that empty space is not empty at all. It can burn, it can suffocate, it can deceive, and it can do all this in silence. By the time you leave that stretch behind, if you do leave it behind, you understand something essential. Survival underground depends not only on dodging what falls from above or what shifts underfoot, but on reading the unseen. A wavering flame, a tired songbird, a headache shared by two men at once. The dark tunnels are full of dangers you can hear and touch. The air reminds you there are others that pass straight through the hand and wait in every breath. You leave the bad air behind, or at least you hope you do, and then the mine presents another of its endless talents for discomfort. Water. Not the pleasant kind in a basin at home, not rain on a roof while you sit indoors, but water that gathers where you work, slides down walls, drips from timber, seeps through rock, and turns the floor into a long argument between mud and stone. If the roof fall shocks you and the gas unnerves you, the water wears you down more slowly. It chills, softens, rots, swells, slicks, and soaks, until your body begins to feel as if it belongs to the mine more than to you. The first sensation is usually underfoot. You plant your boot where the ground looks firm enough, and instead it sinks slightly with a sucking sound that is somehow both ridiculous and discouraging. A shallow puddle is not always shallow. Mud can look still and behave treacherously. Water runs in grooves, gathers in hollows, and hides edges that matter very much when you're carrying weight or moving quickly. Every step becomes a negotiation. The floor asks, are you paying attention? And you are wise to answer yes. Then there is the steady drip from above. It lands on the cap, the shoulder, the back of the neck, always with uncanny precision. One drop is nothing. The 100th feels personal. Some passages sweat constantly, the rock giving off moisture, as though the mine itself cannot stop exhaling. Your sleeves darken. Your collar clings. The knees of your trousers never quite dry. The skin inside the boot softens and wrinkles. To be wet for hours is bad enough. To be wet in moving cold air or in clammy stillness is worse. The body does not know whether to shiver or steam. A basic truth of 19th century mining is that water control is one of the great engineering challenges of the industry. Mines often required pumps, drainage systems, dits, or steam engines to keep workings from flooding. In some places, these systems were impressive feats of industrial ingenuity. In others, they were inadequate, delayed, poorly maintained, or overwhelmed by local conditions. If the pumps failed, whole sections could become unusable or deadly. Even when they worked, seepage and standing water remained part of ordinary labour. The earth, after all, does not stop being wet simply because investors have drawn up plans. You feel the cold most sharply in the feet first. Wet boots are a form of slow cruelty. Leather grows heavy. Socks cling. Toes lose their cheerful sense of individuality and merge into one general complaint. A worker with dry feet is luckier than he knows. A worker with wet feet all week begins to carry the chill upward into the ankles, calves, knees, and lower back. And because mining demands so much crouching and lifting, every part of the body conspires with the next to magnify discomfort. By the end of a long wet shift, even your bones seem to have absorbed the damp. Hands suffer too. Wet handles slip. Fingers numb. Grip weakens slightly, which is all it takes to make tools feel more dangerous. A man may rub his palms on his trousers before every lift, knowing full well the dryness lasts about 2 seconds. The lamp glass beads with moisture. Timber swells and becomes harder to judge by sight alone. Clothing rubs differently when soaked. The whole environment becomes less predictable in tiny ways, and tiny ways are exactly how the mind likes to make itself troublesome. There is also a particular smell to wet workings. Not only earth and stone, but something mineral cold and stale mingled with rot from timber and the metallic tang of tools. In flooded passages or poorly drained areas, the air takes on that strange underground scent that seems both clean and foul at once. Clean because it is only water, and rock foul because it has sat too long away from daylight. Your nose learns to sort these subtleties faster than your mind does. Workers survive this by adaptation, not victory. You learn where the water gathers, where the floor is safer, where planks have been laid, if any exist, where a wall can be touched for balance, where to place a foot when carrying a load. You keep moving when standing still would make the cold settle more deeply into the legs. You preserve dry items if you can, tucking food or cloth where damp reaches them last. You change posture often enough to prevent the stiffness from setting like plaster. None of this defeats the wet, it merely stops it from winning too quickly. Some miners took simple measures with grease or oil on boots, leggings, or clothing to resist moisture, though such protections were limited and depended on what a household could spare. There are accounts from pit communities of boots dried by the fire so aggressively that the leather cracked, because the alternative was putting on yesterday's cold, wet misery all over again. Imagine ending a shift chilled to the marrow trudging home, and then discovering that the next day's best footwear now resembles a tired loaf of burnt bread. Industrial life has a gift for these little dignities. There are odd stories, too, about underground water. In certain districts, workers spoke of some drips as lucky and others as wicked, depending on where they appeared and whether they seemed to precede trouble. A sudden new trickle from the roof could make men uneasy. Water often reveals changing ground after all. Yet there was also a kind of practical superstition around especially clear seepage, with occasional claims that it tasted sweet or strengthening compared with surface water. Whether that was genuine preference or a triumph of desperation is hard to say. A thirsty man working in a 19th century mine is not exactly a refined judge. Specialists who study labour and health have spent a good deal of time trying to untangle just how much chronic damp contributed to miners' long-term suffering compared with dust accidents, poor housing infection and exhaustion. The answer, annoyingly for tidy arguments, is that all these burdens overlap. Constant wet and cold weaken the body, encourage skin problems, worsen joint pain, and likely make respiratory troubles harder to bear. But because miners were exposed to so many hazards at once, no single one stands neatly apart like a demonstration in a classroom. Life underground was not arranged for analytical convenience. The emotional wear of water should not be ignored either. A collapse is dramatic. Gas inspires dread. Water can make everything feel endless. The drip never stops. The puddle is there again. The boot is wet again. The cuff is soaked again. Fatigue deepens under repetition. Men become irritable. Jokes grow flatter. Even a short temper must work hard to remain lively in so much damp. And yet humour persists. A miner stepping ankle deep into unseen water may remark that the management has thoughtfully provided a bath at no extra charge. Another may say that if the mine gets any wetter, it will start charging fishing fees. These are not brilliant jokes, perhaps, but underground standards are mercifully flexible. You also notice how water changes sound. A dry tunnel carries different echoes than a wet one. Drips mark time. A trickle runs behind the general noise of labour. Boots squelch where they once scraped. A cartwheel hisses through mud. Sometimes the presence of water muffles the space in a way that feels almost intimate, as though the mine is speaking closer to your ear. Other times it amplifies unease, every drop sounding like a signal from somewhere you cannot quite place. By now your clothes cling so fully that you almost forget what dry fabric feels like. Your shoulders ache from bracing against slippery footing. Your feet feel older than the rest of you. Still the shift continues. It always does. That is the astonishing and depressing thing. Men work through damp that would send most modern people back indoors with a hot drink and several complaints to management. Here, there is no hot drink waiting in the tunnel, and complaints rarely improve drainage. So you keep moving through the mud, through the seepage, through the patient dripping cold. You adjust each step shift, each load, guard the little warmth left in your body, and learn one more lesson about survival in the dark tunnels of the 1800s. Sometimes danger arrives with a roar. Sometimes it arrives one drop at a time until your strength is not shattered, but slowly dissolved, and your task is to remain yourself despite the wet earth, trying to claim every inch of you. You have learned by now that the mind takes what it can from every living thing that enters it. Men give muscle, children give time, families give comfort and wages and sleep, and in many pits animals give their strength too quietly, steadily, with far less complaint than management probably deserves. So as you move along the underground roadways with mud tugging at your boots and the stale air pressing at your chest, you begin to notice another presence in the dark. Hooves, warm breath, a low shifting sound in the passage. The pit ponies are here. They do not arrive with any grand flourish. No one announces them as noble partners in industry. They stand in the half-light, small, sturdy and patient, their coats dulled by dust, their harnesses worn smooth by use. A lamp catches the curve of an eye, the twitch of an ear, the damp shine along the flank. The smell reaches you before the shape fully does animal heat, mixed with leather hay manure, wet stone and coal dust. In the underground world where everything feels mineral and harsh, the presence of a pony is oddly grounding, a creature from fields and daylight now folded into the machinery of the mine. This is no sentimental fantasy. Ponies and horses really were used in many 19th century mines to haul tubs of coal or ore through the roadways, especially where the distances from the coal face to the shaft or loading point were long enough to make human hauling less efficient. Their labour transformed output in many districts. They could pull more than a child often, more steadily than an exhausted man, and over time they became essential to the daily rhythm of countless pits. A historian of industry would call them working animals within an extractive system. A tired miner might simply call them the only creatures down here with any real sense. You watch one step forward, careful on the damp ground head lowered slightly beneath the roof. Some ponies are brought underground each day. Others live below for long periods, sometimes months or years, depending on the mine, the era, and the local arrangement. That detail alone has lodged itself powerfully in later memory, and understandably so. The idea of an animal spending most of its life in darkness, learning roads beneath the earth instead of lanes under the sky, carries a sadness that needs no embellishment. Yet it also speaks to how complete the mining world becomes. It does not merely use the earth. It creates a separate environment, with its own routines where even daylight creatures adapt to darkness. You hear the clink of harness chains and the squeal of wheels as the tub begins to move. The pony leans into the load with a calm, practiced effort that looks almost modest, until you consider the weight involved. Muscles tighten under the coat. Hooves search for firm purchase. The animal knows the route often better than a newcomer does. Experienced drivers trust that knowledge. A pony may hesitate at bad footing, shy from a dangerous edge, or refuse a stretch of passage that smells wrong or feels unstable. Men notice these reactions. Whether from instinct training or simple familiarity, the animal becomes part of the mine's intelligence. There are accounts from mining districts of ponies learning the underground roads so well they could work with minimal direction, stopping at accustomed points, recognizing turns and adjusting their pace to the gradient of the passage. One can imagine some proud owner or driver describing this with the same warmth another man reserves for a clever sheepdog. It is a small but touching reminder that even in industrial settings people form attachments where they can. A beast that works beside you, endures the same mud and gets you through the shift, becomes more than equipment, at least in the eyes of those who deal with it daily. That said, affection does not erase hardship. Underground animals lived hard lives. They hauled in poor air in damp, in noise under low roofs amid sudden shouts and shifting ground. Their bodies wore down, their joints stiffened, their skin rubbed raw beneath harness. Some were treated kindly, some plainly were not. The historical record offers both. Mining memoirs sometimes recall beloved ponies given names, fed treats spoken to like old companions. Other sources describe a harsher reality of overwork and rough handling. The truth, as so often, lies in uneven human behaviour. Compassion and cruelty coexist very comfortably in labour systems when profit is involved. A curious detail appears in more than one mining tradition. Ponies were sometimes thought to sense danger before people did, becoming restless, before a roof fall or balking at bad air. Whether this happened often enough to matter in practice is difficult to prove, but the belief persisted because it fit the experience of workers who already relied heavily on signs and instincts. In a world where lamps, lungs, and floor vibrations all served as warning systems, why not the nerves of an animal too? There is something deeply human in wanting the creatures beside you to be wiser than you are. You notice how the presence of ponies alters the atmosphere of a passage. Their warmth cuts through the damp a little, their breath clouds faintly in colder stretches. The soft thud of hooves has a different emotional register from the ring of iron tools. It makes the mind feel for a moment less like a machine and more like a harsh underground village populated by beings all trying to get through the same miserable day. A pony flicks its tail, stamps, snorts, and suddenly the passage has personality. Working with them requires skill of its own. Drivers or handlers must know how to guide the animal through confined spaces, how to steady a load on rough ground, how to judge when a tub is too heavy, how to calm fear before it turns dangerous. A frightened pony in a tight roadway is a serious problem. A stubborn one can halt movement for everyone. A good one is a treasure. Just as miners learn not to waste their own energy, they learn not to waste an animal's either, because a spent pony is not easily replaced and cannot be patched up with the same rough practicality as a torn shirt. Writers on labour and animal history have long examined whether pit ponies should be understood mainly as victims of industrial exploitation, or as participants in a working partnership that miners genuinely valued. Both readings hold truth. The animal has no meaningful choice in the matter, which makes the exploitation clear. Yet many workers depended on them intimately and cared for them with real feeling, which makes the relationship more complicated than simple machinery. The mine had a way of binding lives together even when the system itself remained pitiless. Feeding and watering the ponies became part of the daily order too. Hay grain rest, grooming where possible, all this mattered. An ill-fed or neglected animal could not pull properly, which meant delays, danger, and further strain on the people around it. So once again, survival depended on maintenance. Keep the creature sound, keep the harness in order, keep the roadway passable, keep the work moving. The mine rewarded neglect with chaos. There are stories half humorous and half affectionate of miners smuggling little treats to favourite ponies or talking to them more politely than they spoke to supervisors. One cannot entirely blame them. A pony that shares your burden in silence is easier to esteem than a manager who appears mainly to count output. In some recollections, men describe certain animals as moody, vain, lazy, or brave, giving them fully developed personalities the way workers everywhere personify whatever stands closest to them day after day. Perhaps that's sentimental, perhaps it is simply accurate. The soundscape of the mine shifts again as a line of tubs moves out, wheels, rattling harness, straining hooves, knocking gently against stone. You step aside, pressing into the wall, and feel the warm animal pass in the gloom. It smells of effort. It smells alive. For a second, you think of open air, of fields, of weather, of all the things this creature perhaps once knew, or perhaps never truly did. Then the procession moves on, and the darkness closes again around its little pool of light. By now, you understand that the underground world runs on more than muscle and mineral. It runs on relationships, uneasy and practical, between humans, beasts' tools, and the tunnels themselves. The pony pulling its load through the mud is not just another feature of the mine. It is part of the fragile arrangement by which everyone down here gets through the shift. The workers survive partly because the animals do too, and in that cramped passage with leather creaking and hooves steady in the dark, you feel the strange tenderness of shared endurance beneath the earth. Sooner or later, the mine collects its payment from the body. Sometimes it's a dramatic demand, a crushed foot, a broken arm, a scalp torn by low rock or moving gear. More often it is smaller at first, which is almost worse, because small injuries have a habit of piling up until a worker no longer remembers what it feels like not to hurt. A split knuckle, a twisted wrist, a bruised shoulder, a back pulled during a lift that should have been shared but was not. The mine rarely needs one grand disaster when it can wear you down by installments. You feel this truth in the ordinary way the shift presses on. Every motion carries risk because every motion is done in confined space, on uncertain ground with weight fatigue and haste, all leaning in the wrong direction. A hand slips from a wet handle and skin peels. A knee strikes stone. A shoulder catches timber. A tub wheel clips the ankle. None of these would make a dramatic headline, but together they build the physical vocabulary of mining life. By evening, a man may look whole enough to the eye while feeling as though the day has used him for parts. One firm reality from the 19th century is that workplace injuries in mines are frequent and formal. Medical support at the pit is often limited, delayed or uneven depending on region and employer. Some larger operations developed more structured arrangements, doctors on call companies, surgeons, stretchers or aid funds, supported by workers' contributions. But for many miners, the first response to injury came not from polished institutions, but from nearby hands, rough cloths, practical experience, and the immediate question of whether the injured person could still be moved safely. Modern emergency response this is not. No one is arriving with a bright jacket, a clipboard, and reassuring phrases about protocol. So when someone gets hurt, the first treatment is often improvisation. A cloth tied tight to stem bleeding, a splint made from wood at hand, cold water if any can be trusted, a man helped upright by his mates or kept still if moving seems foolish. The mine teaches workers to become reluctant medics because there is no luxury of waiting for ideal help. They know how to bind a limb well enough to get a man home. They know how to judge whether a finger is merely battered or properly broken. They know the look of shock before the word becomes fashionable in medical textbooks. And yet the line between useful rough care and harmful rough care is thin. A shoulder may be hauled back into place by someone more confident than correct. A wound may be wrapped in a cloth that is practical but hardly clean. Pain may be dismissed because there is work left to finish and wages to preserve. The body in this world is both precious and expendable. Precious because it earns the household bread. Expendable because the system assumes broken workers can be replaced more easily than dangerous conditions can be fixed. That cruel contradiction sits behind almost every injury underground. When a man cannot continue, the whole mood changes. The rhythm of labour falters, tools slow, voices sharpen. Men gather in that tight, practical way working people do when faced with hurt they have seen too often. No one wastes many words, but attention narrows. Can he stand? Can he speak clearly? Is the leg bearing weight? Did the rock glance off or land full? Is he bleeding more than seems wise? Some miners become very calm in such moments, and that calm is not coldness. It is familiarity doing its grim work. You also notice how pain behaves underground. It can seem delayed, hidden behind heat dust, adrenaline, and the need to keep going. A hand that felt only jarred during the shift may swell by evening. A back strain that seemed manageable at noon may stiffen into near uselessness after rest. A cut filled with grime may become angrier by the next day. This slow reveal makes injury especially treacherous. The mind does not only wound in the instant, it sends consequences home with you. Home, in fact, is where much of the real treatment begins. Women in mining communities often tend injuries with compresses, bandages, poultices, herbal preparations, hot cloths, broth, patience, and an eye trained by long exposure to working bodies. They do this not because they have been awarded official authority, but because the household cannot function otherwise. A wife or mother may know how to wash a wound, how to wrap a chest, how to judge whether fever is beginning, how to tell if a man is pretending a serious injury is minor, so he can return to work too soon. Domestic care is one of the hidden medical systems of industrial life. There are all sorts of home remedies in circulation. Some seem sensible enough. Rest, warmth, clean cloth, broth, simple herbal salves. Others wander into that old borderland where necessity and folklore shake hands. Goose grease onion poultices, mustard plasters, spirits rubbed into sore limbs, charms tied near an aching joint, and all manner of advice passed from neighbour to neighbour, with complete confidence and variable results. One rather odd belief in certain working communities held that a bruise might draw out better, if treated with a coin bound over it, preferably silver, if one could spare such grandeur which many could not. Whether this worked physically is doubtful. Whether it comforted people trying to do something, anything for pain, is much easier to believe. Medical historians continue to explore how much miners trusted trained doctors versus local remedies and community knowledge. In some districts, workers were deeply suspicious of company surgeons, suspecting them of serving the owner's interests first. In others, medical men were valued but expensive or not always available at the moment they were needed. The result was a mixed system of formal medicine, self-treatment, and household skill. None of it erased the central problem that injured workers often faced a brutal choice between healing properly and earning wages quickly. That economic pressure changes everything. A broken body is not only suffering, it is lost income. A man laid up for weeks is a household crisis. So many return too soon. A hand still weak grips a tool again. A rib not fully settled is carried back underground beneath a shirt and stubbornness. A limp is hidden as best it can be. The mine, after all, does not pause because one worker has the bad manners to be hurt. This is one reason chronic pain becomes so common. The body is not allowed the time it needs to repair, and then there are injuries that never fully go away. Fingers that no longer bend right, eyes dimmed by dust or accident, knees that lock in damp weather, a shoulder permanently lowered, a cough deepened after chest trauma. In many mining districts, older workers bore visible signs of earlier mishaps like unofficial badges from a very unkind club. Not every scar had a story worth telling, because too many stories sounded alike. Fell rock, bad lift, slipped tub, poor footing. That is the brutal banality of it. There is a grim humour around these hurts too, because humour keeps men from being swallowed by constant apprehension. A worker with a bandaged hand might be told he has finally found a respectable excuse for avoiding house repairs. Another with a bruised backside after a fall may be informed that the earth has personally kicked him for laziness. These jokes are not elegant, but they are useful. Laughter gives pain a smaller room to occupy. What remains unsettled among specialists is how far mining communities normalized injury as inevitable, versus how far they resented it as evidence of preventable neglect. The answer likely shifts by place, generation, and circumstance. People can accept danger as ordinary and still hate the conditions that intensify it. They can patch one another up with practical calm while remaining fully aware that better ventilation, better support, better management, and better hours would save bodies. Endurance is not the same as consent, though outsiders sometimes mistake it for that. You stand in the half-light now watching a man flex sore fingers, another roll, a bruised shoulder, a third sit very still because standing hurts more than he wishes to show. The mind keeps asking for labour from bodies already marked by previous asking. That is the terrible cycle. Still they wrap the hand, straighten the back, share the remedy, make the joke and return when they can. Survival here depends not on remaining unhurt, because that luxury is seldom available, but on becoming astonishingly practiced at damage control. And so the shift continues through aches, splints, poultices remembered from home, and the shared knowledge that pain is now one of the permanent workmates in the tunnel. Not welcome, never admired, but familiar. The workers do not defeat it. They outmanage it day by day, which in a mining world is sometimes the nearest thing to triumph anybody gets. Pain, you discover, is only one bill the mine sends home. The other arrives folded into wages, deductions, prices and debts, all the invisible machinery waiting above ground to make sure that even after a man has hauled coal through mud and bad air, someone else still gets the cleaner share of the bargain. By the time payday comes, it can feel less like reward and more like a brief, gloomy ceremony in which hope passes through too many hands before reaching your pocket. You picture the pay office first. Men queue with tired shoulders and blackened faces, boots planted in dirt, caps in hand or jammed under an arm. There is talk, but not much ease in it. A week's labour has gone into these wages, and yet everyone knows the sum may already have been sliced to pieces by advances, fines, rent, doctors' fees, tools, lamp charges, powder costs in some mines, or the eternal appetite of the company store. A coin received is not always a coin truly yours. It has obligations clinging to it before you ever touch it. This was one of the harsh economic truths of 19th century mining life. In many districts, miners faced irregular pay deductions they could not easily challenge, and systems that tied them closely to employers through housing credit or company-controlled shops. Payment in cash existed certainly, but wages were often unstable, especially where demand fluctuated, stoppages occurred, or the owner preferred to shift business risk down onto the people doing the heaviest work. In some places, workers were even paid by output or by the tub, which might sound fair to someone sitting comfortably at a desk until you remember that poor seams, bad ventilation, damaged roads, flooding, or weak transport could all cut earnings without reducing the effort required. So you collect your pay and begin the quiet arithmetic of survival. Rent first, perhaps if the company owns the house, and is kind enough to take its due whether or not the roof leaks. Then food. Bread, flour, tea, coal for the fire. If the household cannot simply help itself to the product, it digs out because history is occasionally so absurd that miners may live beside mountains of coal and still struggle to heat their homes properly. Then boots, if the old pair has finally given up. Then cloth, then soap, then the debt from last week, then perhaps a doctor or medicine if someone at home is unwell. By the end of it, the wage packet has thinned to a disappointing little whisper. You start to see why company stores cause such resentment. In many mining communities, the employer or allied businesses controlled access to goods, housing or credit in ways that kept workers dependent. Prices might be higher, choice might be worse, quality might be doubtful. Yet if you were short of cash or far from alternatives, the store still had you. It is one thing to risk your lungs underground. It is another to emerge and find that even your loaf of bread has been arranged to favour someone else's ledger. The mind follows you home in numbers as well as dust. There is a physical sensation to debt, and it is not unlike the low roof in a cramped passage. You feel it above your thoughts, always just there. A child needs shoes, the rent is due. Work was slow because of flooding. A husband is laid up with a strained back. A daughter needs cloth for winter. A son has outgrown his jacket again, the inconsiderate creature. Every household decision presses against the same narrow limit. Spend here, lose there. Save now, suffer later. Delay one payment, invite another worry. Scarcity makes accountants of people who never asked for the job. Yet mining families are resourceful to an almost heroic degree. They stretch money with the same determination miners use to stretch strength underground. Food is bought carefully. Small gardens matter. A pig, a few hens, or a patch of potatoes can soften the cruelty of the wage system. Clothes are patched until the original fabric feels more rumour than reality. Children hand garments down through the family, with varying levels of grace. Neighbours lend barter exchange and remember who owes what with a precision that would impress any banker and terrify most bankers morally. There are stories from pit communities of payday rituals that capture this tension perfectly. A man comes home with his envelope or coins and the household mood shifts not into celebration exactly, but into a brief alertness. What can be paid? What must wait? What can perhaps be spared for a treat? A little meat, a ribbon, tobacco, sweets for the children. Something tiny to prove that labour has not only purchased continuation, but life. These moments matter. They are not frivolous. They are a household's way of saying we are still people, not merely a set of deductions. At the same time, payday can carry its own dangers. Taverns wait. Creditors wait. Temptations wait. A man who has spent the week under enormous strain may want noise drink and escape. Some find that. Some go too far. This creates its own layer of domestic tension, of course, because every coin spent one way cannot be spent another. Moralists of the era love to blame workers for poverty, as if beer invented exploitation, which is a charmingly convenient argument for those who profit from low wages. Still within mining communities themselves, there were plenty of sharp debates over thriftway's pleasure respectability and who got to judge whom. Economic historians have never entirely settled the question of how much company store dependence was driven by coercion, convenience, isolation, or the ordinary instability of working-class income. Different regions produced different arrangements. In some places, workers had alternatives and used them. In others, the store system operated almost like a trap with a friendly counter. The details varied. The feeling of entanglement did not. You also notice how wages shape status within the workforce. A skilled hewer may earn more than a labourer. A man working a better seam may seem luckier than another in a poor one, though luck and geology are difficult companions to trust. Boys' earnings matter, but not enough. Older workers who can no longer manage the hardest physical jobs may slide into worse-paid roles or out of work entirely. Injury age and family size all alter the household equation. The mine is not only dangerous, it is hierarchically dangerous, spreading hardship unevenly and then pretending this reflects merit. One odd little custom appears in some coal districts where families, especially children, could read the health of the household budget almost instantly from what appeared on the table after payday. A bit of butcher's meat might signal a decent week. Extra tea might suggest something slightly better than usual. No one needed formal accounts when stew itself could act as an economic bulletin. It is a strangely intimate form of financial reporting, and perhaps a more honest one than many ledgers. You may also hear complaints about truck, the notorious practice in some times and places of paying workers in goods tokens, or restricted credit rather than straightforward cash. Laws were passed against versions of it, but enforcement and evasion had a complicated relationship. The mere fear of being tied too tightly to non-cash systems haunted labour politics for good reason. A man cannot bargain freely if his pay is already trapped in someone else's shop. What the wage system does to the mind is just as important as what it does to the pantry. It narrows the future. Plans become short. A week ahead is manageable. A month ahead feels ambitious. A year ahead belongs to optimists, saints, or liars. Families still dream, of course. better housing, a son apprenticed elsewhere, a daughter married well, enough savings for hard times. But dreams in a mining settlement are usually built from practical materials. You do not imagine a palace. You imagine boots that last a winter and a week without debt. Labour scholars still examine how far miners understood themselves primarily as wage earners in an industrial market versus members of older local moral economies shaped by custom fairness and mutual obligation. The answer, predictably, is both at once. Men could talk about prices and rates with sharp sophistication, while also feeling deeply that certain deductions, certain rents, certain store practices were not merely costly, but wrong. The language of survival mixed with the language of justice, and that matters because by now the injury, the fatigue, the damp, the bad air, all of it meets the wage packet at the end of the week and asks a single cold question. Was it enough? Most often the answer is no, or not quite, or barely, if nothing goes wrong, and something always goes wrong eventually. So you stand there with your pay in hand, feeling its weight and its insufficiency together. The coins are real. The effort behind them is real. The bread they buy will be real too. Yet so will the debts, the rent, the rising prices, the deductions made by men who never crouched in a flooded seam. Surviving a mining job in the 19th century means more than enduring the dark. It means climbing back into daylight only to find that daylight has its own tunnel made of numbers, and you must keep walking through that one as well. By the time wages have been counted, shaved down, and worried over, you might think there would be no room left for anything as light as humour. And yet humour persists underground with the stubbornness of a weed in cracked stone. So do songs. So do nicknames, rituals, muttered charms, little habits that make no economic sense, and yet hold a community together more securely than many official rules ever could. If the mine wears the body down with pressure and repetition, workers answer in part by filling the dark with meaning. Mischief and the sort of half-serious superstition that thrives anywhere, danger becomes routine. You hear it first in the jokes, not polished jokes, not the kind anyone would write neatly into a book of comic sayings for polite society, but quick remarks tossed into the dust to keep fear from getting too comfortable. A man squeezing through a low seam might announce that the owner has thoughtfully designed the place for people with no spine, which is why management feels so at home above ground. Another staring at a particularly miserable patch of mud may declare that the mine has finally expanded into seaside property. The laughter that follows is not loud, but it matters. It breaks the pressure for a moment. It reminds everyone that the tunnel has not yet swallowed their personalities whole. This kind of humour appears again and again in miners' recollections from the 19th century. Workers in dangerous industries often rely on wit not because conditions are funny, but because wit gives shape to fear. The mine can still hurt you. The roof can still shift. The air can still turn foul. But if you can mock the place even briefly, then you have carved out a tiny corner of freedom within it. In labour history that matters more than it may appear, joking is not a distraction from survival. It is part of survival. Songs do similar work. A snatch of tune in the roadway, a line hummed under the breath while waiting, a rude verse about the overman, a hymn remembered from chapel softened into habit rather than devotion. Not every mine is filled with singing, of course. Many are too noisy, too tense, or simply too exhausting for that. But songs travel through mining communities above and below ground alike. They help pass time, mark rhythm, teach local stories, and sometimes preserve grievances more faithfully than official records do. A tune is easier to carry than a pamphlet, and often safer too. Some songs are comic, some mournful, some practical in their cadence. You can imagine a worker using rhythm to steady the body, just as sailors or harvesters have done in other labouring worlds. Even a half-remembered refrain can make repetition more bearable. A melody catches in the mind and gives the next 10 minutes a shape. That is no small gift in a shift that may otherwise feel like one endless, airless hour. There is also the rich matter of nicknames. A mining crew is not a place that leaves people with only their Sunday names for long. Someone becomes Red Jack Tiny Tom Crooked, Ned Lampy Fox Old Crow, or some title even less flattering and much more permanent. Nicknames mark affection, mockery, rank, incident, or bodily trait. They turn the workforce into a recognisable human circle rather than a row of interchangeable labouring backs. A man may be known less by his birth name than by the story attached to his nickname, and in a dangerous trade to be named by your companions is to belong. Then the superstitions begin to show themselves. Some are grand enough to sound theatrical when repeated later. Others are wonderfully small. In one place, a worker refuses to whistle in a certain passage because it stirs trouble. In another, someone avoids speaking lightly about death before a shift because the mine might overhear and grow interested. A lamp dropped at the start of the day is taken by some as a rotten sign. Meeting a certain person on the way to the pit may be judged lucky or unlucky, depending on the district and the private logic of generations. Rationally, these customs do not control geology. Emotionally, they offer a framework for a world full of hazard. One especially curious thread in mining folklore concerns knocks in the rock. Strange sounds underground are common enough for perfectly natural reasons: settling water movement, distant work pressure in the seam. Yet in some districts, unexplained knockings became wrapped in older beliefs about spirits' warnings or presences in the earth. The Cornish had stories of knockers, little underground beings said to tap in the working sometimes as a warning, sometimes as mischief. Similar ideas flicker elsewhere in different forms. Whether miners fully believed such tales in a literal sense is almost beside the point. The stories gave personality to the unknown. They turned blind danger into something, with habits which is psychologically easier to live with. Anthropologists and social historians have spent a good deal of time asking whether mining superstition should be read as sincere belief, dark humour, coded safety wisdom, or some blend of all three. That last answer is usually the most convincing. A taboo against whistling might preserve quiet where listening matters. A warning about careless speech before descending might encourage seriousness at the start of a shift. A story about a sound in the rock might help younger workers remember that unexplained noises deserve respect. Folklore and practical caution often share a coat and boots, especially in the dark. You notice too that faith and superstition do not necessarily quarrel, as much as tidy modern categories would expect. A miner may say a prayer before entering the cage, and also refuse to begin work after a certain unlucky incident. He may carry a small cross and trust a lucky coin. He may attend chapel faithfully and still mutter about the mine having moods. Human beings are perfectly capable of stacking meanings on top of one another when life gives them enough reasons to be anxious, and the 19th century pit gives reasons in abundance. Above ground, these beliefs continue. Families may keep customs of their own. A wife may dislike sewing while her husband is below, or insist on a certain farewell. A mother may keep a Bible verse tucked in a pocket, or knock on wood when bad news is mentioned. Children absorb all this quickly. They grow up learning not only the physical routines of a mining district, but its emotional grammar, the signs, sayings, jokes, little avoidances, and inherited gestures that make uncertainty feel slightly more manageable. And still, for all the superstition, the humour remains the brighter thread. It keeps vanity alive too. A worker may boast that his lamp burns truer than another man's, or that his section of roadway is so handsome it deserves visitors. Someone will answer that only rats would visit willingly. Another may claim that the pit pony shows better manners than half the men on the crew. A fourth points out that this is not a difficult standard to meet. Such exchanges are tiny acts of civilization. They prove that wit, judgment, annoyance, and affection have all survived another hour underground. There is also a rough artistry in how miners tell stories. Accidents become anecdotes once enough time has passed. A close call grows details. A foolish mistake is retold for years, especially if it happened to someone proud. The darkness itself encourages a style of speaking that is vivid and compact. You cannot rely on sight, so description sharpens. A smell, a sound, a stumble, a flicker of light, these become narrative anchors. Mining communities, like many labouring communities, are rich in oral memory because so much of life there has to be carried in voice. Some observers once dismissed such songs and superstitions as ignorance, which says more about the observers than the miners. What looks childish from a safe chair may be perfectly sensible when your work depends on reading danger, managing nerves, and binding a crew together in a place where formal comforts are scarce. Even if a charm does nothing measurable, the hand that touches it may steady. Even if a joke changes no material condition, the laughter may loosen fear's grip for a minute. In a long shift, a minute matters. Debate continues over whether these cultural habits mainly softened hardship or quietly resisted the discipline of industrial labour by preserving worker identity. The most persuasive answer is that they did both at once. A song can soothe and mock. A nickname can bind a crew and undermine official hierarchy. A superstition can comfort and encode caution. The mind demanded obedience from bodies, but minds found crooked little ways to remain their own. So you keep moving through the tunnel, through the mud and lamp glow and low roof. Hearing a joke bounce off stone, catching a tune drift through the stale air, watching a man tap his charm before a difficult stretch, though he would deny doing any such thing if asked directly. The dark is still dark. The danger is still real, yet it is no longer empty. It is filled with human noise, half laughter and half ritual, all of it working quietly against despair. And in that mixture of songs, jokes and old beliefs, you see another way miners survived the 19th century by refusing to let the tunnels have the last word on what sort of people they were. There are days when the jokes fall a little flatter, when the songs do not quite rise, when the air feels heavier, even if it is technically safe. Those are the days when the memory of loss sits closer to the surface, as familiar as the tools and just as difficult to set aside. In a mining community of the 19th century, death is not an abstract idea tucked neatly into distant conversations. It is present, it has names, it has dates, it has families who carry it into every ordinary moment. You notice it first in the way people speak of those who are gone, not with grand speeches, not with elaborate gestures, but with a steady, almost practical tone. He was here last week. He knew that passage well. He had a good eye for the roof. These remarks carry weight without needing embellishment. They're acknowledgements that in this line of work absence can arrive suddenly and stay permanently. Mining accidents claimed many lives throughout the 1800s, from explosions and collapses to flooding and gas exposure. Entire crews could be lost in a single event, leaving communities shaken in a way that no single injury could match. Official records list numbers, dates, causes, but those entries barely hint at the human cost beneath them. Each loss ripples outward through families, through streets, through the shared memory of the workforce. The mind does not forget, even if it does not pause. You imagine a funeral in such a place. It is not rare enough to feel extraordinary, and that is perhaps the most unsettling detail. People gather dressed as well as circumstances allow. Faces are solemn but not unfamiliar with grief. The path to the church or burial ground is one many have walked before. There may be hymns, quiet prayers, the sound of boots on earth, the murmur of voices offering comfort that cannot fully reach where it needs to go. Children stand close to adults, absorbing the weight of the moment in ways they may only understand later. Faith plays a central role for many. Chapels and churches in mining districts often serve not just as places of worship, but as anchors of community life. Ministers, priests, and lay leaders offer words meant to frame loss within something larger, something enduring. Whether every listener finds comfort in these words is another question, but the act of gathering, of speaking of, marking the passing, together carries its own significance. It reminds people that they are not facing the mind's dangers alone. At the same time, grief in these communities has a practical edge. A household that loses a worker must reorganize immediately. Income disappears, responsibilities shift. Older children may take on more work. Relatives may step in where they can. Neighbours may offer help, though they are often struggling themselves. There is little time for prolonged withdrawal from daily life. Survival demands continuity, even when hearts are not ready for it. You see how this shapes the way people process loss. There is sorrow, certainly, but also a kind of endurance that can look from the outside almost like acceptance. It is not that people care less. It is that they cannot afford to stop caring about everything else. The next meal must be prepared. The next shift must be worked. The next bill must be faced. Grief becomes something carried alongside these tasks rather than something that halts them. There are customs that help hold this balance. In some places, communities organise collections for bereaved families, small contributions that when gathered together provide a measure of relief. In others, mutual aid societies form offering support in times of sickness or death. These arrangements are not perfect, but they represent a collective attempt to soften the hardest edges of industrial life. They are expressions of solidarity built from necessity and sustained by shared experience. You also notice how memory is preserved. Stories are told not just about how someone died, but about how they lived. A man's skill, his habits, his humour, his small quirks become part of the community's narrative. In this way, individuals remain present even after they are gone. The mine may take a life, but it does not erase it from the minds of those who remain. There are quieter forms of remembrance too. A tool kept aside, a place at the table that feels different, a path walked with a certain awareness. These are not formal rituals, but they carry meaning nonetheless. They are the subtle ways in which loss becomes woven into daily life. At the same time, there is an undercurrent of unease that runs through it all. Each worker knows that the risks faced by others are also faced by them. Every funeral is a reminder not just of what has happened, but of what could happen again. This awareness does not always lead to fear in the obvious sense. Instead, it becomes part of the background of existence, a constant but often unspoken presence. Scholars have long examined how communities exposed to frequent danger develop coping mechanisms that allow life to continue. In mining districts, this often includes a combination of shared belief, mutual support, and cultural practices that normalize risk without entirely dismissing it. The result is a delicate balance between acknowledgement and endurance, between mourning and moving forward. You see this balance in the way people return to work after loss. There may be a brief pause, a moment of collective recognition, but then the routines resume. The cage descends, the tools strike, the carts roll. It is not indifference. It is necessity shaped into habit. The mind does not wait, and neither can those who depend on it. And yet within this cycle, there is also a quiet resistance. By remembering, by supporting one another, by marking loss in ways both public and private, the community asserts its own values against the impersonal forces that govern the industry. It insists that each life matters even if the system treats it otherwise. You carry this understanding with you as you continue. The darkness around you is not empty. It is filled with the presence of those who have worked here before, some still living, some not. Their stories linger in the tunnels, in the routines, in the very way the work is done. To survive in this world is not only to endure the physical challenges, but to navigate the emotional landscape shaped by shared risk and shared memory. And so you move forward aware that every step is part of a larger story, one that includes both the living and the remembered, all bound together by the same demanding, unyielding environment. Grief does not stay quietly folded away forever. It has a habit of turning into something sharper when it meets enough frustration, enough hunger, enough days where the danger feels unnecessary rather than inevitable. You begin to sense that beneath the routines, beneath the jokes and songs and shared meals, there is a steady current of anger running through mining communities. Not always loud, not always organised, but present, waiting for the right moment to rise. That moment often comes when workers decide they have endured quite enough without being heard, and in the 19th century that decision could take a very specific form: a strike, a refusal to descend, a line drawn not in chalk or ink but in bodies that stay above ground when the bell rings. It is a risky choice because survival depends on wages and wages depend on work. Yet sometimes the conditions become so strained that continuing feels more dangerous than stopping. You stand at the edge of such a moment now. The pithead looks different when men gather there without preparing to go down. There is a tension in the air, not the quiet tension of a working day, but something more charged. Voices rise more easily. Faces are set in ways that speak of decision rather than habit. Someone has called for this, or several have, and the idea has spread quickly through the rows of houses, through the small conversations at doors and corners. Today, perhaps the mine will not get what it expects. A widely recognised feature of 19th century mining life is the growth of organised labour movements, particularly in Britain, the United States, and parts of Europe. Miners were among those who began forming unions, friendly societies, and other associations to press for better wages, safer conditions, and fairer treatment. These efforts did not emerge all at once or without conflict. They developed unevenly, shaped by local conditions, leadership, and the willingness of workers to take collective risks. You listen as men speak in low clusters. Complaints that were once muttered quietly now come out more directly. Pay that does not match the effort. Deductions that seem unjust. Conditions that have worsened. A recent accident that felt preventable. Each point on its own might have been endured. Together they form something heavier, something harder to ignore. Not everyone agrees immediately. Some hesitate, thinking of rent of food, of children who need shoes. A strike is not simply a statement. It is a gamble. Days without work mean days without pay. The household arithmetic you have already learned does not pause for principle. So debates unfold right there in the open air, voices measured, sometimes heated, always aware of what is at stake. There are leaders, though they do not always look like leaders in the formal sense. A man with a clear voice, another with a reputation for fairness, someone who has read a pamphlet or attended a meeting in a nearby town. These individuals help shape the conversation, but they are also shaped by it. A strike only holds if enough people believe in it at the same time. You notice how quickly solidarity becomes both strength and strain. When workers stand together, they gain leverage. A mine cannot run without its labour force. But that unity must be maintained, and that is not easy when hunger begins to press. Families feel the absence of wages almost immediately. Support networks are tested. Some communities organise collections, share food, or find temporary work. Others struggle more visibly, the cracks in the system widening under pressure. There is also the presence of authority. Owners, managers, and sometimes local officials respond in various ways. Negotiation dismissal threats, replacement workers. Each response carries its own risks. The arrival of strike breakers, for instance, can inflame tensions, turning economic conflict into something more personal and immediate. Lines are drawn not just between labour and management, but between workers themselves. Historians continue to examine how effective these strikes were in achieving lasting change. Some led to improvements in wages or conditions. Others ended with little gained and much lost. The outcomes varied widely, influenced by factors such as organisation, public support, economic conditions, and the willingness of employers to concede. What remains clear is that these actions marked a shift in how workers understood their position. They were no longer only individuals enduring hardship. They were part of a collective capable of challenging it. You see this shift in the way people speak. The language changes subtly. Words like we and us appear more often. Grievances are framed not as personal misfortunes but as shared injustices. There is a growing sense that the conditions of the mine are not fixed, not beyond influence, but subject to negotiation, however difficult that negotiation might be. At the same time, there is fear, not just of immediate hardship, but of longer-term consequences. Being known as a troublemaker could affect future employment. Being part of a failed strike could leave a family worse off than before. These concerns are real, and they weigh heavily on decisions. Courage in this context is not loud or dramatic. It is quiet, persistent, and often accompanied by doubt. There are moments of solidarity that stand out. A shared meal when supplies are low. A collection taken for a family in need. A group standing firm when pressure mounts to return to work. These acts do not solve every problem, but they reinforce the sense that no one is facing the situation entirely alone. You also notice how information travels. News of strikes in other regions, of successes or failures, spreads through word of mouth, through letters, through occasional printed materials. These stories influence local decisions, offering both inspiration and caution. A victory elsewhere might encourage action here. A defeat might lead to hesitation or a different strategy. Scholars still debate the extent to which these movements were driven by immediate economic pressures versus broader ideas about rights, fairness, and social change. The two are closely linked, of course. A demand for better pay is also a demand for recognition. A call for safer conditions is also a statement about the value of human life. In mining communities, these ideas are not abstract. They are grounded in daily experience. As the day unfolds, the decision becomes clearer. Some men return to work, others remain. The outcome is not always neat or unified, yet even in partial action something has shifted. The act of questioning, of organising, of standing together leaves a mark. It changes how workers see themselves and how they're seen by others. You stand there watching this moment of tension and possibility, and realise that survival in the mining world is not only about enduring what is given, it is also about deciding when to push back, when to risk the uncertain in the hope of something better. That decision does not come easily, and it does not always succeed. But it is part of the story as much as any tool, any tunnel, any shift. And as the voices rise and fall as the day moves forward with or without the descent, you understand that the struggle for survival extends beyond the physical boundaries of the mine. It reaches into the social and economic structures that shape every aspect of life here. In that wider struggle, the workers are not just enduring. They're in their own way trying to change the terms of endurance itself. Once you have stood in one mining district long enough, it is tempting to think you understand the whole underground world. Then history, with its usual lack of politeness, reminds you that mines are not one thing. Coal is not copper, tin is not salt. A pit in Wales does not feel like one in Pennsylvania, and a shaft in northern France does not quite breathe like one in Cornwall. The darkness may seem universal, but the hardships shift shape from place to place, and so do the ways workers learn to live through them. You travel now in the mind's eye not with any romantic flourish, just by following the labour where it goes. In one place you're in a British coal mine, low-roofed, damp, black with soot, the passageways made for crawling, stooping, hauling and enduring endless grime. In another you are in a metal mine where the rock is harder, the seams narrower in a different way, the extraction slower, more drilling than cutting, more blasting in some periods, more stone dust than coal dust, more cold perhaps, and a different smell rising from the walls. Elsewhere you enter salt mines, where the underground world can appear strangely pale and crystalline, almost beautiful until you remember that beauty and exploitation are perfectly capable of sharing a room. One solid piece of historical reality is that 19th century mining expanded across many regions because industrial economies were hungry for all kinds of materials. Coal-fed furnaces and railways, iron ore-fed foundries, copper-tin led silver, gold and salt. Each had their own markets, their own methods, their own labour demands. This meant that miner could describe people working under sharply different conditions even within the same century. The broad hardship linked them. The details made each district its own world. Coal mines often created the particular horrors you already know well. Gas-black dust, low seams, pit ponies, long underground transport routes, and a relentless intimacy with soot. A miner emerging from coal looks transformed, face-blackened clothes carrying the shift on every inch of fabric. Coal enters the lungs, the skin creases the hairline, the dinner table, the bedding, the language of the town itself. In those regions, survival meant becoming expert in combustion, collapse and air. Metal mines could be different in mood and method. In Cornwall, for example, tin and copper miners descended into deep, hard rock workings where heat could become astonishing underground, especially in the deeper mines. The drilling and blasting demanded a different rhythm from hewing coal. The work could be slower in one sense and more technical in another, with gangs drilling shot holes, setting charges, clearing shattered rock, and following veins that twisted unpredictably through stone. The danger did not soften. It merely changed costume. Instead of fire damp always waiting to turn flame into disaster, there might be greater emphasis on blasting accidents, rock falls in hard ground, water problems, and the long-term bodily wear of hammer and drill. And the sounds shift too. Coal gives you thud and scrape and the muffled break of seam. Metal mining can ring. Hammer on steel, drill against rock. A sharper music, if one may call it that, without sounding too pleased with misery. The walls echo differently. Dust tastes different. The underground air may feel colder at one level, hotter at another, depending on depth and drainage, and the workings around you. Your hands still blister, your back still complains, but the mine teaches your body a slightly altered grammar. Salt mines create yet another version of the underworld. There is something eerie about white or pale walls underground, something almost chapel-like until the labour begins and ruins the illusion properly. In some salt workings, the environment could be less explosive than coal, but still punishing in other ways with dust-hauling darkness, damp strain, and the monotony of heavy extraction. Salt also had a nasty habit of working itself into skin and wounds, which sounds exactly as delightful as it is. A scrape you might ignore elsewhere can sting like a pointed insult when salt is in the air and under the fingernails. Across the Atlantic, American mining districts add further variations. Pennsylvania coal towns, Appalachian seams, Western silver camps, each developed their own labour arrangements, ethnic mixtures, housing patterns and safety cultures. A company town in one region might bind workers tightly through housing and stores. A frontier metal camp might feel more temporary, rougher, more fluid, sometimes more chaotic. Yet beneath those differences you still find the same essential bargain. Bodies descend, wealth rises, the risk stays mostly with the people below. Researchers who compare mining regions still wrestle with a deceptively simple question. Which sort of mining was hardest to survive? There is no tidy answer because hardest depends on whether you mean immediate danger, chronic illness, bodily strain, seasonal instability wages age of entry or chance of catastrophic disaster. Coal miners faced frequent threats from gas and roof falls. Hard rock miners endured drilling, blasting, crushing labour, and in many places severe dust exposure. Salt workers had their own punishing conditions. Every district, if asked, could make a persuasive case for having suffered in the most original and unreasonable way. There are local customs and oddities, too little regional fingerprints on hardship. Cornish miners carried strong traditions of migration and specialised identity, and some tales from those districts speak of underground spirits, or knockers with an affection that feels almost familial. In some gold or silver camps, the surface settlements around the mine could be rowdier, more temporary, full of quick fortunes and quicker disappointments. In old European salt regions, the mines sometimes acquired an almost ceremonial status in local culture, as if generations had learned to live not just beside it, but with it as a defining presence. Industrial labour is never merely technical. It grows local character like moss on stone. You also see how geography shapes the worker's whole day. In some places the mine sits beside a settled village with chapel school and rows of houses pressed close together. In others it lies in mountainous terrain or sparse country, where distance itself becomes another hardship. A man may climb to work, descend to work, and then climb home, which feels excessive even by history's usual standards. Harsh weather matters too. A freezing walk to the shaft in one region, summer heat in another. Rain turning paths to mud-snow making transport worse. All these surface conditions attach themselves to underground labour and alter its burden. Then there are differences in reform and regulation. One district may gain inspection earlier, another may lag. One employer invests in ventilation or drainage because loss has finally become too expensive. Another waits until a disaster forces the point. Regional law, custom and politics all influence what workers can demand and what owners can get away with. This means that two miners living in the same decade might inhabit very different risk landscapes depending on where they stand. A rather strange but memorable detail from some mining regions is the pride workers took in local expertise, sometimes to the point of treating outsiders with amused suspicion. A man from one district might be judged instantly by his method, with tools, the way he read a seam, the words he used for gear, even how he carried his lamp. Mining identities could be wonderfully specific. The Universal Brotherhood of Labour had plenty of room for regional side-eye. The emotional tone of different mines changed as well. Coal districts often carried that heavy sense of enclosed blackness and family continuity. Fathers, sons, daughters, pitheads, rows of houses, chapel bells, the whole social world built around the shaft. Metal camps could feel more mobile in some cases, tied to price booms and busts, migration, technical specialization and speculative hope. Yet even there, once families settled and routines formed, the same questions emerged. Who gets hurt? Who gets paid? Who leaves? Who stays? Who is buried here? What remains fascinating is how workers adapted differently, without becoming entirely different kinds of people. Everywhere they learned to read danger. Everywhere they managed hunger, fatigue, debt and bodily wear. Everywhere they developed songs, jokes, loyalties, grudges and practical knowledge. The mine changed shape, but the human response carried familiar threads across borders. So as you pass from coal to copper, from tin to salt, from Britain to America and beyond, you do not leave the story. You deepen it. The dark tunnels of the 19th century were many dark tunnels, each with its own texture and discipline. Workers survived them in locally specific ways, yes, but also through shared habits of caution, endurance, and community. Different mines, different hardships, same stubborn human effort moving under the earth and trying with varying luck to come back out again. And as you follow mining across regions, another pattern becomes impossible to miss. The people moving into these districts are often newcomers. They arrive with trunks that are too small for all they have left behind, with accents that mark them immediately, with recipes, prayers, songs and work habits carried from one landscape into another. Some come because they have heard of wages, some because land at home has failed them, some because famine, debt, conscription, eviction, or sheer lack of possibility has pushed them outward until the mine, dark and unwelcoming as it is, begins to look like an opening. You see them at the edge of pit villages and camp settlements stepping into work that is already dangerous before they even learn the local shortcuts. An Irish family in a British or American coal district, Welsh miners moving where seams promise steadier pay, Cornish miners carrying hard rock knowledge across oceans to metal fields abroad, German, Polish, Slovak, Italian, and other migrant workers entering industrial regions where labour is needed, and sympathy is often in shorter supply. The mine has an extraordinary appetite for people who need work badly enough to tolerate almost anything. A well-attested feature of 19th century mining history is that migration fed mining expansion on a huge scale. Industrial districts drew labour from rural regions, from neighbouring counties, from other kingdoms and empires, and from across the Atlantic. Certain mining skills travelled too. Cornish hard rock miners, for instance, became famous for taking their expertise around the world. In coal districts, waves of migrant labour reshaped whole communities, altering language, religion, politics, and neighbourhood life. The mine did not just extract minerals, it reorganised populations. For the newcomer, survival begins with disorientation. The road to the pit is strange. The speech around you is partly familiar, partly impenetrable. Underground terms are local and often stubbornly so. One district's ordinary word for a tool or passage can sound absurd to another's ear. That matters more than it seems, because in dangerous work misunderstanding is never just embarrassing. A misheard warning, a confused direction, a local nickname you do not yet understand, any of these can make the mine even less forgiving. So migrants learn quickly and they learn socially. A cousin already settled in the district may help you get a place. A neighbour from the old country may explain the overman's tone, the gang's habits, the local pattern of wages, the route to the chapel, the name of the shopkeeper most likely to extend credit without looking as pleased as he ought not to. Above ground, this softens the landing. Underground, it can save your life. Who teaches you where the roof usually works loose, where the air feels wrong, which deputy is trustworthy, which section floods first after heavy rain? That kind of knowledge rarely arrives through official kindness. It comes through people. You notice too how old identities travel into new landscapes. A man may be earning wages in Pennsylvania while still eating food that tastes like home swearing, in another language when the tub catches, keeping feast days, naming children after saints or relatives from a village now very far away. Women preserve these continuities powerfully through cooking, worship, child-rearing, and the daily patterns of home. In mining communities, migration is never only about labour supply. It is about households carrying culture into rough industrial spaces and refusing to drop it completely even under pressure. That pressure can be intense. Newcomers are not always welcomed with open arms and soup. Established workers may resent them as wage competition. Employers may prefer them precisely because they are more vulnerable, less connected, easier to threaten with dismissal or blacklisting. Religious difference can sharpen tensions. So can language. In some towns, the street itself becomes a map of belonging, one lane more Irish, another more Welsh, another more recent arrivals from continental Europe, each group carrying pride and grievances in equal measure. The mine brings people together underground, but not always gently above it, and yet cooperation forms because it has to. A roof fall does not pause to inspect your birthplace. Bad air treats dialects with impressive equality. Shared risk has a way of teaching practical solidarity, even where prejudice still flickers. You may grumble about the newcomers on the surface, and then trust once with your life when the tunnel narrows and the lamp burns low. Human beings are annoyingly inconsistent in this regard, capable of suspicion and dependence at once. Some of the most interesting traces of migrant survival appear in the exchange of techniques. One group knows a better way to timber a troublesome section. Another carries blasting habits from metal mines. Another has customs about food pacing or mutual aid that prove useful in a new district. Knowledge moves with people. The mine is local, but labour experience is portable. That is one reason owners sought certain workers so eagerly. They were not merely bodies, they were bodies carrying specialised memory, A charmingly specific detail from several mining migrations is the persistence of regional baking and lunch foods underground. You can cross oceans and still find a worker unwrapping something recognisably tied to the old home. A pasty, a dense loaf, a particular dumpling, a pie prepared the way a mother or wife insists it should be done regardless of what the new country thinks of it. Food becomes both fuel and flag. It says you may have taken the day, but you do not get every habit. There is also music. Songs travel magnificently. A tune from one mining district turns up in another, altered slightly in words or rhythm, and before long it belongs to both. Hymns, ballads, laments, teasing songs, work songs, all of them, help migrants stitch old feeling onto new circumstances. A chorus shared in a boarding house or chapel can do what wages cannot. It can make a place feel less temporary, less cold. Historians who study migration and labour continue to ask whether mining communities eventually smooth these differences into a broader working class identity, or whether local ethnic and religious divisions remain the stronger force. The evidence points both ways at different moments. In times of strike or disaster, solidarity could widen dramatically. In times of competition and scarcity, older divides could harden. Identity underground was layered. A man might be Irish Catholic, a father, a miner, a union member, and a newcomer all at once, with different parts of that self, becoming more important depending on the day. Children born into these communities often became the bridge between worlds. They picked up the local speech, faster absorbed school lessons. Where schooling existed, learned the mines routines from the new district, rather than the old homeland, and still carried family customs at home. They translated literally and socially. Sometimes they entered the pit young, too young, and brought that mixed inheritance with them underground. In them you can see industrial society building itself generation by generation, not neatly, not kindly, but unmistakably. Mutual aid among migrants became another important tool of survival. Boarding arrangements, burial collections, help finding work assistance during strike support. For widows, all these often moved through networks of kin countrymen, chapel members, lodge brothers and neighbours. To an outsider, these ties might look clannish. To the people relying on them, they were the difference between collapse and endurance. A newcomer alone was fragile. A newcomer folded into a network had a chance. There were odd frictions too, almost domestic in their pettiness compared with the scale of industrial hardship. Complaints about cooking smells, about children's noise in a different language, about saints' days, feast days, processions, songs, drinking habits. Politics, the proper way to keep a house, all the little things by which communities test one another. These tensions matter because they remind you that solidarity is built, not granted. Shared suffering does not automatically produce harmony. It produces opportunities for it and opportunities for resentment too. Still, when disaster strikes, many of these distinctions blur. Rescue efforts, collections, funerals, and long nights of waiting at the pit head often bring people together more honestly than public speeches ever do. A grieving household matters more than its accent in those moments. Bread is bread, prayer is prayer. A hand on the shoulder means what it means in any language. The mine forces a kind of realism on human relations. You can keep your prejudices if you insist, but you may still need the man beside you to help lift the beam. By now you can see that migrant workers did not merely enter mining life, they reshaped it. They brought labour skill, faith food conflict, memory and hope from elsewhere into these dark industrial worlds. They altered the sound of the streets and the taste of the suppers. They changed the politics of the pit and the future of the settlement. Above all, they survived by borrowing strength from old identities, while learning the unforgiving rules of a new place. And that may be the most moving part of all. In the 19th century, mine people carried entire lost landscapes inside them, then went underground and used those memories, customs and connections to stay alive in a world made of rock, risk and need. The tunnels were dark enough already. Borrowed hope passed hand to hand among migrants helped keep them from becoming completely lightless. Borrowed hope can only carry a community so far before people begin asking for more than endurance. They begin asking for change. Not the dreamy sort that arrives in speeches and disappears by Monday, but the slower, harder kind that must pass through inspections, reports, laws, petitions, arguments, public scandal, and the long resistance of men who profit nicely from things staying exactly as they are. By now you have seen enough of the mind to understand why reform becomes necessary. The stranger question is why it takes so long. You feel the answer partly in the age itself. The 19th century is full of industrial pride. Railways spread, furnaces glow, cities swell, production rises, wealth appears in dazzling concentrations. In that atmosphere, suffering underground can be treated as regrettable but somehow secondary. The cost of progress filed neatly under unfortunate realities by people who do not breathe coal dust for a living. Reformers have to fight not only dangerous conditions, but a whole way of thinking that treats working bodies as inputs before it treats them as lives. Still, change does come, though rarely in the clean, heroic manner later generations prefer. It comes through inquiry. It comes through disasters too public to ignore. It comes through witnesses who describe conditions so plainly that polite society has trouble looking away. It comes through newspapers, parliamentary investigations, sermons, union pressure, local agitation, and the inconvenient persistence of survivors who keep talking. In Britain, official commissions and inquiries in the 19th century exposed child labour, female underground labour ventilation failures, and appalling accident patterns in ways that shaped public debate and eventually legislation. Similar pressures appeared elsewhere in different forms, sometimes slower, sometimes sharper, always entangled with politics. One foundational fact is that the 19th century saw the rise of mining regulations and inspection systems in several industrial countries, including Britain's Progressive Mine Acts and later inspectorates, intended to improve safety, restrict certain forms of labour, and enforce standards. None of this happened all at once, and none of it instantly transformed daily life. Yet compared with earlier decades, it marked a real shift. Governments that had once left much of industrial risk to local custom and employer convenience began, however imperfectly, to intervene. You can almost hear the different reactions underground. Some workers greet new rules with relief. Better ventilation, more careful inspection age limits for child labour rules, about shaft signalling or roof support. These are not abstract improvements when your whole life depends on whether the tunnel remains breathable and standing. Others are more cautious, not because they love danger, but because paper promises have a way of arriving before practical enforcement. A law posted above ground does not necessarily mean the deputy in the passage below behaves differently tomorrow morning, and that scepticism is earned. Inspectors cannot be everywhere. Owners resist costs. Local enforcement varies. Mines are complicated, remote, politically influential, or simply adept at presenting a tidier face during official visits than they do on ordinary days. The gap between reform on paper and reform in practice becomes one of the defining frustrations of industrial life. A family may hear that conditions are improving while still washing the same blackened clothes and burying the same injured men. You watch reform move at the pace of damp timber, slow creaking, never quite as reassuring as one would like. Yet even that slowness matters because it creates expectations. Once people have heard that a safer way is possible, the old conditions begin to look less like fate and more like neglect. That change in perception is powerful. It means an accident is no longer merely tragic. It may be judged preventable. A child's labour is no longer just customary. It may be condemned. Bad ventilation is no longer an unavoidable nuisance. It becomes evidence that someone failed. Campaigners play their part in this shift. Some are religious reformers horrified by what they see as moral degradation and physical suffering. Some are political radicals who view mine conditions as proof of a wider injustice in industrial society. Some are doctors, engineers, or inspectors who approach the matter through evidence and technical concern. Their motives differ, which is a very human way for useful alliances to form. You do not need everyone to agree on philosophy if enough of them agree that children should not drag coal half naked through low seams, and that men ought not to explode simply because ventilation was treated as optional. There are memorable details in the Reform story that linger because they are so visual. Parliamentary testimony describing children working in conditions that shocked readers far from the pit. Inspectors descending into workings and emerging with written observations that carried the cold force of official recognition. Diagrams of shafts and ventilation, lists of accidents, tables of deaths. The age loved paperwork almost as much as it loved coal, and in this case paperwork sometimes became a weapon on the side of the workers, or at least on the side of making neglect harder to deny. At the same time, reform could feel paternal, uneven, or compromised. Some laws protected women and children but did little for adult male hours. Some interventions improved one danger while leaving others stubbornly intact. Some owners complied only where visibility or punishment demanded it. Labour historians still examine whether 19th century mine reform should be seen chiefly as humanitarian progress state, expansion class compromise, or a way of stabilising industry by preserving a healthier workforce. Unsurprisingly, the answer contains pieces of all four. Human beings rarely improve systems for only one reason at a time. There are also unintended consequences. Restricting children underground might protect them certainly, but it could also strain household budgets unless wages or alternatives changed. Better inspection might close particularly unsafe workings, which improved safety while threatening income. Technical improvements could reduce one risk while introducing new routines, new machinery, or new forms of discipline. Progress, as the century repeatedly demonstrates, is rarely simple and never free of trade-offs for working people. You see workers adjusting to these changes with the same practical intelligence they bring to everything else. They learn the new rules, test their limits, invoke them when useful, distrust them when necessary. A miner may appeal to regulation in an argument with management and then complain the next day that the inspector rarely visits the places that matter most. A family may welcome the end of certain child labour practices while worrying furiously about the missing wages. Reform enters life not as a perfect gift, but as another force to be negotiated. One odd and revealing detail from mining districts is how quickly official language could be absorbed into local speech, half seriously and half mockingly. Men might joke about whether the roof had received proper inspection before dropping stones onto their dinner, or whether the puddle in a roadway had filled out the required paperwork before becoming a lake. Such jokes were not signs of ignorance. They were signs that workers understood exactly how the promise of reform could drift away from the reality of mud, water, and risk. What becomes clearer over time is that inspection and law alter not only conditions but imagination. A younger worker entering the mines later in the century may inherit a slightly different sense of what he is entitled to expect. Not comfort, never that, but perhaps a safer lamp, better signalling, fewer very young children underground, some official notice when disaster strikes. These are modest expectations by modern standards, but in the long history of labour they matter enormously. They represent the beginning of a world in which danger must at least defend itself. Researchers continue to argue over how fast these improvements really reduced mortality and suffering, because regional variation remained large, and the numbers themselves can be slippery. Better reporting may make danger look worse before it looks better. Some districts improved sooner, others lagged badly. Chronic illness kept haunting the workforce even as spectacular disasters sometimes declined. Yet few serious observers deny that reform, however halting, slowly changed the mining world. It made certain abuses harder to hide. It gave workers' arguments allies and occasionally leverage. And you can feel that change at the pithead in the altered expectations, the sharper questions, the sense that conditions are not merely handed down from the earth itself, but shaped by human choice. That realization may be the deepest reform of all. Once workers know that safety can be improved, that childhood can be protected, that inspection can expose lies, that management can be challenged, the old fatalism begins to crack. So you stand in this late 19th century atmosphere of slow adjustment and unresolved struggle, watching the old world resist and the new one arrive in fragments. Not enough. Never fast enough for those already hurt. Never complete, but real. The dark tunnels are still dark. The shifts are still long. The wages still disappoint. Yet somewhere in the creak of the pithead and the rustle of official papers, something has changed. Survival is no longer only a private art practiced in silence. It has become a public argument about what workers should be forced to endure, and that argument will not easily be pushed back underground. And now, after all the damp tunnels, the low roofs, the bad air, the wages that vanish too quickly, the songs, the funerals, the strikes, the slow reforms, you come at last to the end of the shift. Not the end of danger, never quite that, but the end of this day's bargain with the earth. The tools feel heavier now in your hands, not because iron has changed, but because your body has. Your shoulders are drawn down, your knees answer more slowly. The grime on your skin no longer feels like something added from outside. It feels absorbed, as if the mine has written itself into you for a few more hours. This final stretch of work always has its own character. Morning effort contains dread and preparation. Midday labour becomes rhythm. The last part is different. It is a test of restraint, of not making foolish mistakes simply because daylight is somewhere above and your mind has already started climbing toward it. Experienced miners know this well. Fatigue invites carelessness with the same soft voice every time. Just one more cut, one faster lift, one short walk taken without full attention. That is how a long day can end stupidly, which is not the sort of ending anyone wants attached to their name. So you move carefully, perhaps even more carefully than before. You finish what must be finished. You load what must be loaded. You check the tools, the timber, the lamp, the route out. A practiced worker does not leave the face like a man fleeing a fire, unless there is in fact a fire. He leaves with method. In many mines, the end of the shift involves signals, routines, and the slow gathering of people and equipment back toward the shaft or roadway. That order mattered. Underground traffic could be dangerous enough in daylight if there had been daylight. Confusion at the end of a long shift helped no one. You begin to feel the strange pull of upwardness before you see any sign of it. The thought of surface air changes your breathing. The body, however tired, gathers itself around the idea of emergence. Perhaps the cage is still some distance away. Perhaps the road is muddy and crowded. Perhaps there is waiting yet. Still, the mind has gone ahead, picturing open sky like a luxury item. Human beings are very easy to please after 10 or 12 hours underground. Offer them oxygen room to stand upright in the horizon, and they will think civilization is making a decent effort after all. As you walk back through the workings, you notice the mine in reverse. Places that earlier seemed merely functional now carry the softness of familiarity. Here the roof dipped so low you nearly blessed the invention of stooping. Here the water found your collar with criminal consistency. Here the pony passed smelling of hay and patience. Here the lamp flame looked wrong for a moment and everyone grew quieter. Here someone told a joke too poor to deserve the laugh it got. The tunnel has become a memory before you even leave it. Men are quieter now, though not silent. Fatigue changes the tone of everything. Conversation comes in scraps. A complaint about the mud. A muttered count of tubs. A reminder not to forget some bit of gear. A dry remark about how the owner should charge visitors admission to such splendid scenery. Even exhaustion leaves room for sarcasm, which is encouraging. In some communities, the journey back toward the shaft formed a daily social knot of its own, a moment when workers compared the shift, shared small news, counted injuries, and measured one another's condition with quick glances that rarely required many words. You reach the shaft area at last, and the waiting begins. This too is part of mining life. Descending and ascending are controlled by machinery, by order, by timing, by the realities of who gets moved first and how many can fit. So you stand in the half-gloom with the others, body cooling now that the heavier exertion has eased. Sweat turns clammy. Wet cloth feels colder. Dust on the face tightens at the skin. Tiredness settles more honestly once work stops. During labour, the body postpones some of its complaints out of necessity. At the end, it begins filing them all at once. One enduring fact of mining communities is that the return to the surface carried social meaning far beyond the practical act itself. It marked the daily reappearance of workers into family life, neighbourhood, life, public life. The mine did not merely employ men, it removed them and gave them back each day, sometimes late, sometimes hurt, sometimes not at all. That rhythm shaped the emotional structure of whole settlements. Children learned to watch for fathers returning. Wives listened for steps, voices, the familiar scrape at the door. A normal evening depended on that re-emergence. Then the cage rises. You feel it in the stomach first, the motion upward, the machinery taking hold again, the dark walls sliding past in a direction that seems almost morally improved. Going down feels like surrender. Coming up feels like negotiation rewarded. Air shifts as you ascend. It freshens gradually, then more noticeably. Coolness changes. The black above is no longer the black of rock, but the thinning dark beneath open sky. And when daylight or evening light appears at the mouth of the shaft, it can seem absurdly bright, almost theatrical. The surface has the indecency to look beautiful simply because it is not underground. You step out and the world greets you with weather. Wind on the face, the smell of smoke from chimneys, mud under a sky large enough to feel extravagant, the sound of voices spreading rather than echoing. Even a grey industrial evening has tenderness after a shift below. That is one of the quiet emotional truths of mining life. The surface may be poor, crowded and hard, but after the tunnels it still offers release. Space is a kind of mercy. So is ordinary air. People emerging from pits were often described by contemporaries in ways that mixed admiration, pity, and moral commentary. Blackened faces, reddened eyes, stooped posture, exhaustion, written plainly into movement. Yet those same workers also carried themselves with the habitual normality of people who had done what the day required. That is perhaps the most striking part. Not theatrical heroism, daily return. The courage lies in repetition. You look around and see how the mine has altered everyone a little differently. One man limps more than he did this morning. Another still has enough energy to make a joke on the walk home which feels suspiciously optimistic. A boy looks older in the evening than he did at dawn. Someone checks a lamp. Someone spits black. Someone stretches the back slowly, carefully, as if negotiating with each vertebra in turn. The day has left its marks and tomorrow will add more unless chance or reform or common sense intervene. There are local sayings in many mining districts about counting yourself rich if you come home whole, though whole is almost always an exaggeration. Still, the sentiment matters. Survival was measured daily, bodily modestly. Not in triumphs fit for marble statues, but in boots reaching the doorstep, in food eaten by lamplight, in clothes hung to dry, in children hearing the latch lift. One wonderfully odd little custom remembered in some communities involved children trying to guess the identity of returning miners before the men washed distinguishing fathers and brothers by gait cough or the shape of a cap, because every face arrived equally blackened. It is a tender image and a practical one. The mine blurred appearances. Love learned other ways to recognize its people. Those who study mining life still discuss whether the most important survival skill was technical knowledge underground, or the wider social fabric that received workers above ground. By now you know better than to choose only one. A miner needed to read air roof tools' pace and danger below. He also needed food care, family, labour, ritual, humour and community waiting above. Survival was never singular. It was a braided thing made of muscle memory, luck and other people. And as you walk away from the pit head, black with dust and drained by labour, you carry more than fatigue. You carry proof of an entire way of life. The 19th century mining worker survived not by conquering darkness, but by learning how to pass through it, again and again without surrendering every part of himself. He adapted, he relied on others, he joked, he struck when he could, he mourned, he came back up. That last act repeated thousands of times by ordinary people whose names rarely reach history books is its own kind of grandeur. So the day closes, boots on the path, smoke in the air, the body aching toward rest. Behind you the mine waits with its old patients ready to open again tomorrow. Ahead, a door, a meal, a wash basin, perhaps a chair, voices low by the fire, and the fragile comfort of having made it through one more descent and one more return. And now the pace softens. The pithead grows quieter in your mind, its timbers dark against the fading sky, its great wheel no longer threatening, only turning more slowly in memory. You walk on through the evening air and feel the day loosening from your shoulders bit by bit. The soot is still there, the ache is still there, but neither needs to speak quite so loudly now. A light glows in a window ahead. Somewhere a kettle murmurs. Somewhere boots are set by a hearth to dry for tomorrow, though tomorrow can wait a little while longer. You let the road lengthen gently beneath your feet. The voices around you fade into a low, familiar hush. The mind behind you becomes only a dark shape at the edge of thought, no longer swallowing, no longer demanding, just resting for the night as you do. In the stillness, the small comforts seem larger than they did before. Warm bread, a chair, a hand on a shoulder, a room with a roof that stays where it is put, a world with stars above it, however dim behind the smoke. And so you breathe a little more easily now, in and out slow, and even as if the open air itself is tucking the day away. The tunnels recede, the lamps dim, the wheels fall silent. What remains is the simple, steady grace of return, of being above ground, of being home, of being for this moment safe enough to rest. Let the darkness be soft now. Let the road end at the door. Let the fire burn low. Let the old earth keep its secrets until morning, and you at last can drift gently down into sleep while the history settles quietly around you like evening mist. Sweet dreams.